Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is February 2nd, 2024, and we're excited to have a follow-on to yesterday's historic Mormon Stories interview. Yesterday, we interviewed Bishop Nick Jones and his amazing wife, Amanda, and it's already gotten, 60,000 views in less than 24 hours. It's definitely one of the most popular Mormon-themed episodes we've ever done, and in that episode where we talked about Bishop Nick Jones resigning as a Mormon bishop from the pulpit, which was kind of a historic thing that happened, I think, December of 2023. We decided that and this was after my good friend Beau, who you're about to meet again on Mormon Stories, under his recommendation. We thought it'd be super cool to bring a panel of Mormon bishops. And when I say Mormon bishops, I mean ex-bishops. But in Mormonism, there's the saying, once a bishop, always a bishop. So these are all still Mormon bishops. They're just not currently serving as bishops. But we're bringing a panel together of Mormon bishops to talk about their experiences as bishops, which is super cool. I do want to note a couple quick interesting things. For those who have never been Mormon, a Mormon bishop is like a priest in a Catholic church or like a pastor. A Mormon bishop is the leader of a congregation of, let's just say, 300-400 people, depending on the size of the ward, which is the name for a congregation. And normally a Mormon bishop serves for 5 years. And so the other thing I'll just add is Nick mentioned yesterday something that was sort of groundbreaking, that at least 2 stake presidents and 5 bishops have reached out to him saying they no longer believe that the church is true, but they're acting as stake presidents and bishops anyway. That is definitely my experience. I get reached out to at least monthly by Mormon bishop or stake presidents saying they no longer believe, but they feel stuck in their position. And last year on Mormon Stories, we broke ground because we had 2 interviews with Mormon bishops who were currently serving as Mormon bishops when they came on Mormon Stories to say they no longer believed and to tell their story. And I think this epidemic of Mormon bishops, from the church's standpoint, this epidemic of Mormon bishops and stake presidents and top leaders losing their faith while they're serving in their callings, it's just going to keep continuing. And we want to help the church create a safe place for these leaders and their families and for the congregations. So that's all I'm going to say. Now, what I want to really quickly do is reintroduce to you, my dear friend, Beau Euler. Beau was in Mormon Stories at least once with Sane Siali interview. Beau was Carolyn Pearson's bishop in Oakland.
Yep.
Just a few years back. He's brilliant. He's smart. He's a good-hearted guy. And this was Beau's idea, and he's going to kind of lead today, and then I'm going to kind of run the board and jump in occasionally. But Beau, welcome back to Mormon Stories.
Cool. Thanks, John. It's good to be back. It's great to see you.
Yeah.
And thanks for putting this together. It's always fun to be able to share stories and learn from each other.
My pleasure, yeah.
I think it's going to be a good conversation. And where this started really was with Nick and him and Amanda just being brave to be who they are and live their values. And as he, shared his values over the pulpit and stepped down and did what he felt was right for himself, it just got me thinking about my experience as bishop. And although it's been, 6 or 7 years since I was released, it's still very important to me and very dear to my heart. It was a life-changing experience to serve as bishop for 5 years. And so I reached out to you and just, I was like, John, let's get a group of bishops together and let's have this conversation. What is it like to be a bishop? And how does that happen? And what did we learn from it? And if we could do it differently today, how would we do that? And so, that's what we're going to set out to do. And so I'd love for each of us to introduce ourselves. I'll start, like John said, I'm Beau Euler. I am from the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. I served as bishop from 2012 to 2017 in the Walnut Creek Second Ward in the Oakland, California stake. And I was Carolyn Pearson's bishop. She was just a motherly guide to me. As a young bishop, she called me Bishop Beau, and that was kind of my name that stuck in the stake. I was very young. I was 33 when I was called to be bishop. I was in the bishopric before that. I served the full 5 years, and currently I serve in the Young Men's Presidency, or the Young Men's Organization in my ward. I've now moved from the Bay Area to Salt Lake City, and I teach in the Young Men's. My role is to teach a more expansive view of spirituality to the young men, and so I enjoy doing that. And I would say also, I kind of want to set my intention for being here today on Mormon Stories. I know Mormon Stories can be somewhat of a lightning rod, and I fully recognize that. And I participate in the Faith Matters community. I also participate in the Open Stories and Mormon Stories community, and I love both. And for me, I see my faith community as a tent with absolutely no walls. And so what my intention today is to share what my experience was and how I learned and grew during my experience of being a bishop, but also be able to speak to those who are currently serving as a bishop and be able to share some of the things that I wish I had known, and even some of the ways that I've grown since being a bishop. And looking back on those 5 years, if I could do it again, how would I do things differently? And if that's helpful to anyone out there today that is having that experience, the bishop experience, wonderful.
Wouldn't it be amazing if there was like this underground network of Mormon bishops that shared this episode?
Yes.
To give them some training they would otherwise not receive.
It would be the most training they ever received during their entire time as bishop.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So over to you, Nick.
Hello, I'm Nick Jones. Many of you watched the podcast yesterday. So you know a little bit about me. I live in Brandon, Mississippi. My wife and I have 5 children, and I'm in the construction world. That's my line of work, particularly hardwood flooring business. I was called to be bishop when I was 39 years old. I served for 2.5 years, and I recently resigned as a bishop on December 31st.
Yeah, last month.
So in a nutshell, that's who I am. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for joining us. Let's see, Jedd.
Hi, my name's Jedd Cassing. I served as a bishop in Riverton, Utah from 2012 to 2018 for a total of a little over 6 years.
Tell people where Riverton is.
Riverton's in the Southwest Valley, or the southwest corner of Salt Lake Valley, so about, 30 minutes from downtown Salt Lake. Very Mormon, heavily Mormon population out there, and still see the church actually parking lot's pretty full in that neck of the woods. So I don't know that the exodus has quite hit that area as much as some others. But I was 36 years old when I was called to be bishop, and turned 42 right before they released me. Served as a counselor before that for 4 years, so spent a good almost 11 years up on the stand, and there's a lot that comes with that. You miss a lot of stuff being up on the stand with your family, and so there's some hard things part of that. But
You mean without your family, right?
Without my family, yeah. Just, and I have 2 daughters, and they were 2 and 5 when I got called as a counselor, and 14 and 17 when I got released finally as bishop. So I'm you miss a large chunk of their life, and we'll get into that more. But my intention for being here today would be just to share some insights and stories, and hopefully to help the church see that bishops in a lot of ways are left on an island to try to hold together a lot of different moving pieces, and you really don't get any help. So I hope there's some progress in that we can help some bishops that are currently serving, and help bishops who are losing their faith to know it's okay as well. There's no real right way to do it. You follow your heart and do what you can. So glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Jedd. Rob.
Good morning. Rob Gorman here. I served as a bishop in the Silverdale, Washington stake, in the 3rd ward of that stake. That town is across the Puget Sound from Seattle in Washington state. I served as bishop from 1999 to 2007. The math will give you 8 years, typically longer than or longer than the typical assignment in that calling. And we'll probably talk about this later. I was an active duty submarine officer with the Navy, and I had just transferred from Hawaii about 2 months before I was called. And that provided an interesting set of circumstances when you're leading an organization, particularly a spiritual organization of people that you don't know very well. The intention that I have today has been voiced largely. I will add to that I think it's important that people will admit, I think, that they understand this, but I intend to be overt that these people serving as bishops are just men in the same struggle that the congregation members are. And although there is some setting apart and some status and maybe some expectation with keys and so forth, that they're really just men trying to make successful goes of their marriages and of raising their children and their careers. And then you add this other load to it, and it's fairly extraordinary.
Yeah.
Can I just add, Rob, that for those of you who are Mormon Stories nerd super fans, you'll remember Jerry and Julie Johnson that we interviewed. Weren't you Jerry and Julie Johnson's stake president or bishop or something like that?
Jerry and Julie were in the ward. They moved into the ward when I was bishop. So you brought up something I didn't mention. When I was a bishop for 8 years, then I was on the high council for 4, and then immediately into the stake presidency. I was the first counselor for 9. And Jerry, Julie, and I worked together throughout that. When I was in the stake presidency, Jerry was my executive secretary, helped me arrange things and traveled with me as I went around the stake. Yeah, we worked together quite a lot.
These are my Kitsap homies, so I got to give them a shout out. Also, you'll remember, viewers, listeners, super nerds, Kelly and Heather Lang. He was the submarine commander, and Heather's amazing, and their sons. This is also same crew, right?
Yeah, same group of people. Kelly was the ward mission leader when I was bishop, and then when I was in the stake presidency, he was still the ward mission leader. He did that for quite a while. He was good with people like that, and he and I are cut from much of the same cloth. We're both nuclear engineers driving submarines, steely-eyed killers of the deep, if you will.
Were you ever on a submarine?
Absolutely. I spent 22 years in submarines.
Okay,
I was on 4 different ships.
Nice.
And I have lots of good sea stories. No time to tell.
No. All right.
Very cool. All right. Thanks for introducing yourselves. So I think that it may be helpful to do a couple of things before we jump in. Number one, I just want to recognize that, as usual, here we are, 5 men and only men in the room discussing church things. And so there are no female voices in this conversation. There's no representation outside of our pool of male voices and male perspectives. And I just want to simply recognize that that is because of the way that the structure is and the way that the patriarchy is. And so as we collect bishops, it's really the only way to have this conversation as bishops. And it's not because we're not open to other voices and other perspectives, and certainly want those. But the purpose of this is to give perspective as a bishop and from those who have had the experience of bishop. Secondly, I think it would be helpful to dive in a little bit of how a bishop is called to serve, and do that through first-person experience. So, I know, Rob, before we were jumping in, you had shared a little bit about how you were called to be bishop. Would love for you to dive into that and share your experience.
Okay, thank you. So I do get to tell a little bit of a sea story. I'm happy to do that. I was assigned to the USS Batfish in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. I was the engineer officer on that, the person responsible for the reactor plant and all of that. And I was reassigned, got a new set of orders to be navigator on the Alaska up in Bangor, Washington. And moved up there in the early summer of '99. And when I got up there, they put me on a little boat, and I met the ship and went underway and got home about the first part of September. When I got back, my wife had met me down on the pier, and we had to ride a bus together back up to where the cars are parked because there's not enough room down at the pier area. And on the way up on that bus, she told me that I had an interview with the stake president the next night. It was a Wednesday night. And I went into the stake president's office. I should say that I had an interview with him before I went to see that little short trip. We spent 20 minutes in the bishop's office. At any rate, I go in to this appointment and go into the office, and he asked me if I'm worthy to carry a temple recommend. I acknowledged that I was, and he said, "You've been called to serve as bishop in the Third Ward. Can we bring your wife in?" Mm-hmm. And that was the extent of the conversation. My wife came in, and he said to Michelle, "Your husband's been called to serve as bishop in the Third Ward," and she fell apart laughing. Because
It's an appropriate response.
Well, it was a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah.
Obviously, we were new in the area. That following weekend, we had a stake conference where two of the wards were realigned. One of them was the one I was asked to lead. And I didn't know the people in the ward. And as I was standing in stake conference being sustained as a bishop and a high priest, which is an office that you have to hold, an ordination you have to hold to be a bishop in the LDS faith. I have my hand at the square sustaining myself, and I hear, "Who's that?" Behind me somewhere. One of the men that I called to be a counselor with me was someone I had known from the Navy, and he took me on a drive around the ward to show me the boundaries and introduced me to some people, and we met a counselor that was called. And I learned pretty quickly that running a ward was not like running a department on a ship. Alluding to some of the comments you meant about including women, I was in the submarine force at the time that there were no women, and I had been in a career for a decade and a half working with only men, and I tended to be very patriarchal, I guess. I didn't know that word then, but other than the blessing part of it. At any rate, I learned from my first Relief Society that I was doing it wrong, Relief Society president, that I was doing it wrong. Maybe we'll talk about that later.
Sounds like a good woman.
She is a good woman. She's serving as Relief Society president again.
Yeah, excellent. So when you're called to be the bishop, did you have any say in it?
I didn't, at that time, I didn't mention when I introduced my status, so this is relevant. I've resigned, had my name removed from the records of the church. And until the end of the time I was a counselor in the stake presidency and was worried about being called as the stake president, I operated that you didn't decline callings. So did I have say? That's a two-sided question. One, was I provided say from those who were speaking with me about the calling? The other side being, did I provide myself say? And I would say the answer is no in both cases for this time I was called as a bishop.
And there's cultural reasonings behind that, right? Where on one hand, we are raised as young men that we're priesthood holders, right? And we've been chosen, we're the chosen generation. We are to stay worthy and have the Spirit because we're holders of the priesthood. And that we are to use that priesthood in leadership to lead our people. And that one day, we don't know when, that we'll be called to lead, right? And so that day comes, and it's always a surprise. It was a total shock for me. And so we've been trained for that day our whole life. So on one hand, you're right, we don't say no to callings. On the other hand, there's this almost like subculture or sub-thought of, I'm not going to campaign for bishop because that's weird, but also I've been trained my whole life to be the bishop.
Could I add something there? Was a convert. I joined the church when I was 21. I was with the Navy up in Idaho learning how to operate reactor plants and got introduced to the gospel via my wife, actually. She was attending Rick's College at the time. I met her skiing, and that took off pretty quickly. A thought was sparked in my mind, and it had a lot to do with what Nick said yesterday, so I wanted to add that here. When I got called, my own worthiness to be a bishop, I wouldn't have considered myself so. I had faults and things I was working on, like every person does. But I did have it cross my mind, and it did provide me some calm, I think, in this as this change was coming. That if I had been called, I must also have been forgiven.
Yeah. So it's almost like a confirmation, right? That because the stake president clearly has discernment, that he called you to this calling, that therefore you must be forgiven.
Sure. And as I was thinking that came into play as I was working with youth and adults over the time I was assigned ministering, all through the stake presidency.
Can I say something to that?
Yeah.
And maybe you guys know this, that the process in my mind was the stake presidency prays about who should be the next bishop, or maybe a handful of names of who possible candidates could be, but it doesn't end there, because they give those names to the Quorum of the 12 in the first presidency. And then they pray and ponder and really go through this thing to make sure that they pick the right guy. So for me, it was like God called me.
Yeah.
And like you, it was validating in the sense that there were things in my life that definitely weren't perfect. My marriage wasn't perfect. My morals, according to Mormon standard, may not have been perfect, as I raised my hand yesterday, right, about masturbation. But it made me feel like, oh, you're good enough because God, through his prophet, prayed about you and said you were good enough. That's deep. That is, I don't know of any other validation that gets more powerful than that coming from a strong Mormon background.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious if you experienced that dynamic too.
Yeah, absolutely. Super validating. Growing up in the church, I struggled with what I now recognize as massive scrupulosity. Massive.
Tell the
scrupulosity.
listeners what that is.
So scrupulosity is religious OCD. And it is a compulsive need to repent and to confess to a degree that is very unhealthy. Where what it did for me is
It can also be just high rumination.
Absolutely.
Of like guilt and shame,
absolutely.
right?
So guilt
even
and
if you're not
shame-
confessing.
Yeah, absolutely. So guilt and shame over everything,
Yeah.
right? And just constantly in your head over the guilt and shame, and scrutinizing everything that you do, especially around morality, sexuality, anything,
issues.
chastity, honesty, and so that manifested itself for me in just causing high anxiety throughout my life and throughout my mission, and then learning how to really fine tune every behavior of my life, where I was able to, go through great effort, kind of shut down my sexuality and shut down parts of my life so that I had very little expression in those ways in which I felt like I was screwing up, so that I could have the Spirit, because that was the promise. So when I was called as bishop, same experience, right, as Nick and Rob had, where massive validation. It's like, okay, so God is okay with me. So I have been forgiven. These hours that I've spent on my knees pleading for forgiveness for very common things, right? Yep. And let's say, okay, so I'm good. Now, I want to share a little bit about how I was called to be bishop. Very interesting experience, life-changing experience. So when I was 32, my friend, Matt Lyon, amazing person, very nuanced, progressive member of the church. He was serving as elders quorum president. I was serving as ward mission leader. And we just loved each other. Good friends. And he got called as bishop. He asked that I would be his first counselor. And it was one of those moments, like we were standing outside the Oakland Temple. We had just left the stake center. We had just been called. And we like stood outside for like an hour just brainstorming on like how we're going to change everything, right? It was just like, oh my gosh, we're going to tear it up. Like that companionship. We were so excited. And so there we go. So we were like a year in on this bishopric, and we were, I feel like we were making really good impact. His thing, Matt's thing was just meet people where they are spiritually. We are not there to convert. We are not there to push. We are there to just love people where they are. And so big changes were happening within the ward. And then I had the idea one Sunday. I said, hey, the young men next weekend are going to be coming out of their backpacking trip. Let's surprise them and reverse hike. Like we'll go up the backside of the hike while they're coming out, and we'll pack up with like a bunch of goodies, and then we'll go do a fireside and we'll surprise them. And so we drove up and we got a few miles up, and it was in the Sierras. We were above the timberline, no cell service. Matt, who was a 42-year-old healthy person, suffered a fatal heart attack on the trail, and he died in my arms.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And so there we were on the trail, giving him CPR, and it was just me and Matt and our second counselor, and it was devastating. And we had no cells, no way to contact anyone. And so after giving CPR for it was a couple of hours, he was gone, and I just held him in my lap for hours while the sun set. And finally, somebody came down and helped. They ran down, got paramedics. Paramedics came up around midnight, and they carried his body off. And I hiked the rest of the way up, woke his 12-year-old son up, hiked him down, drove home, and spent the morning hours with Bishop Lyon's wife and walked her through every detail of what had happened. The next day, the stake president asked me to be the standing bishop until they can call a new bishop. I said, of course. 6 weeks later, we got a knock on the door at 9 o'clock in the evening, and it was the stake presidency. And they walked in. I knew that it was them thanking me for having served for 6 weeks through what was really a horrific and tragic time for our ward. And so they came in, they sat down with us, and then the stake president, who is an amazing man, very, very good man, President Criddle, he took me into my bedroom. We lived in a 1,000 square foot house in the Bay Area. And he began asking me those same questions that Rob was asked. You know, do you have a temple recommend? Are you worthy to use it? Yes. Brought me back into the living room. And then he called me to be the bishop of the Walnut Creek Second Ward. And we didn't laugh, we cried, because we were already like so devastated from what had happened with Matt and exhausted. And when I became bishop that Sunday, you know, usually when you get a new bishop, it's kind of like the chapter, it's like the new beginnings, right? It's like really exciting. And for me, it was more like a funeral. And it was a general feeling and acceptance of this isn't what was supposed to be. And then people would come up afterward and say these things, you know, to me or especially to Eleanor, to Matt's wife, about like, well, Matt's where he's supposed to be, or Matt's off doing a better, you know, God's work. And it was just so flat and so empty. And so after a few weeks, I asked the stake president, you know, what am I supposed to say to people? Like, this isn't what was supposed to happen. Matt wasn't just supposed to die. And the stake president said, Beau, just tell him the truth. And I said, well, what is the truth? And he said, the truth is Matt's heart stopped and he died. Yeah. That's it. So what are we going to do with that? And how are you going to help your people come under Christ through that? And that's how my bishop experience began. And, you know, I think it's known that like drama tears people apart, But trauma with a T has the ability to bring people together. And that's what happened in our ward. This trauma, which was horrible, and I wish it never happened. I wish Matt was alive. I wish I still had him in my life. But that trauma brought us together, and we were a ward family out of necessity.
That's powerful.
So that's how it began. And I was totally underqualified for it.
Who isn't?
Right.
Who isn't? All of us are.
I'll just jump in and share my experience. It was more of kind of an ascension of moving up the ranks from gospel principles back when they had that class to gospel doctrine to counselor in the elders quorum to elders quorum president to bishop counselor and then finally to bishop. And it just felt like a path that was put before me and that I was taking and going on this path. And it felt very predetermined, preordained. I remember when the bishop prior to me came and told us that he was stepping down. He'd been bishop for about 4 years and started having some health problems, and he wanted to focus on his health, and he said, I need to be done. The stake presidency showed up the next week, and they're talking to everybody and interviewing as many people as they can. And I'm just running around trying to take care of the ward that day. And they finally get a hold of my wife and ask her a few questions. And then they come and talk to me. And then the next week we're invited into the office. And I can't say it was really a surprise. We kind of knew it was coming just because that was the next step to take. Like it was just okay, this is where we're at now. And my wife and I were both very humbled by it and scared by it, but also felt this empowerment. And then when you do get sustained, there's this huge outpouring of admiration and love from the ward that's like they immediately just accept you as their spiritual leader, their guide, the person who's going to help them get through this life. And you feel a real weightiness to that is very humbling and scary for a little while, but pretty soon you get a quick little interview with somebody and you realize we're just back to doing the work. So I don't have anything real spectacular other than I felt the same way. You feel very validated getting that call. You felt very, it's honestly, it's a little bit of an ego boost to get a calling like that and to have everybody start praying for you and you hear these prayers and you start to maybe believe the hype a little bit too much. So that was kind of my experience getting put in and real quickly starting to, you think you know a ward until you bishop. Like as a counselor for 4 years, I was like, I think I got a grasp on this, and
everyone's smiling,
Yeah.
right?
And
one
the
hour
veil's
after
lifted.
being called as bishop, you're like,
Is
I
that
know
something
nothing.
we should check in and have everyone say why
talk
they're
about it.
smiling?
Yeah.
What did each of you mean by that?
For me, since I've got the mic here, literally like, here's the keys to the office. Here's the handbook for bishops, and we set you apart. Amen. Have at it. Here you go. And I go into the office and sit down, and a good friend in the ward says, "Hey, Bishop, can I talk to you?" And I'm thinking it's, "Hey, you're going to come in and say we're excited," and sits down and just opens like, I've got this huge pornography addiction, and I've slept with some prostitutes and
Sex workers.
it's just like, oh boy, I wish I didn't hear that right now. This have waited maybe a week.
And
Let me
this is
get
people
used
you
to
would have never guessed.
Never guessed. No. And I'll tell a real quick funny story. My grandpa was a bishop before me. And when I got called, he told me, you're going to get to know the ward a lot better than you think you do. You're going to see that family in the front row, 4 kids, arms folded, husband and wife, and you're going to be, man, they're great. And the wife's going to come in for a temple recommend interview, and you're going to have a great, lovely discussion. And as she's walking out, she's going to turn around and say, one more question, Bishop. Do you know how I can get my husband to stop wearing my underwear? And I was like, what? And sure enough, it's that level of detail that you start to know about people's lives that you're just completely unprepared for.
Yeah.
And that was just one of those moments over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So that was...
Well, let me do this. So we had texted each other last night, right, John, when you introduced us. Let me do this. So as we talk about when that veil, the bishop veil, was lifted, I just want to read you a quick list. It's kind of a culmination of what the four of us experienced. Okay, so I'm just going to read through real quick, and then we can dive into any of these as you want to. All right. Let's see. Sex abuse toward children, excommunicated 12-year-old, infidelity, homelessness, suicidality, multiple suicides, death, teenagers sent to correctional camps, marriage issues, sex issues, money issues, women issues, patriarchy issues, testimony issues, faith issues, spirituality issues, just feeling walled off from God, addiction, church history, CES letter, church essays, exclusion policy in 2015, pedophiles, Navy and military deployments. Let's see, members shooting themselves on the side of the road with a shotgun. Let's see, adult cutters, teenage suicidality, lots and lots and lots of faith issues, lots of church history issues, people very publicly leaving the church, people going on Mormon stories after they left the church, and that kind of and that kind of rippling through their ward. As John guiltily laughs.
Hi, Johnsons.
Calls to Curtin McConkie. The whole thing with like the troubled teen ranches, with the church paying for those, financial fraud among members, members getting arrested and taken to jail, members molesting people within their scout troop and within their young men and young women. I mean, the people disappearing, this is all the darkness, right? And so I'll start there because I think part of it, I also want to go in the lightness and in the miracles that we saw, the beauty that we saw.
Can I just ask, did you have domestic violence on there?
Yes,
okay.
Domestic violence.
Okay.
I know I used ward funds at one point to fly a mother and her 2 children to an undisclosed location to get away from her husband who wouldn't stop beating her. Yeah. So all of those things, that was just a spattering of things that we texted each other last night of, hey, what did you experience as a bishop? Yeah. And this is what was texted out last night in very normal wards in Mississippi, the Bay Area, Utah, and Seattle. Yeah. Okay. So when we talk about, Jedd, when he becomes bishop and all of a sudden the veil is lifted, this is what we're talking about. In very normal lives, in very normal wards. So with that context, maybe it's helpful, Rob, Nick, what was it like for you as you were baptized by fire?
That's a heavy list. I'm just going to say that's
it's extremely heavy.
Yeah.
I'm smiling only out of self-preservation, right? Because when you're a new bishop with almost no training, and then almost immediately, like Jedd said, a friend of his comes in and it's just like, dude, I'm out of control. Or for me, my first Sunday, a woman came to me in tears that night and said, I slept with someone. And her husband's outside of my office crying. And I called the stake president. I didn't know what to do. And he came rushing in from Oakland and met with her. And after an hour, he came out and they left and he hugged me and he said, "Oh, Bishop, you need to learn to ask more questions." And I said, when someone tells me that they slept with someone, like they slept with someone, like she had sex. I don't know. Like,
what do you ask after that? That that lead you to know more.
It turns out that she didn't have sex. She literally slept in the bed with someone, and she felt so badly. She felt scrupulosity. She felt, yes, it was inappropriate. Of course, it was inappropriate to sleep in a bed with another person, not her husband. But the scrupulosity was she had cheated on her husband by doing this. She had never slept with him. They had never had sex. And so the stake president's like, Bishop, you need to ask more questions. So what did I do as a young 33-year-old? That taught me, I need to dive deep. When someone comes in and says, hey, I broke the law of chastity, now we need to dive in. And that becomes very uncomfortable very quickly.
Can I just say really quickly, so there's a way that I'm relating to this, and there's a way that this is way beyond, because I was trained as a psychologist. I spent 6 years doing psychotherapy. And yes, I dealt with active suicidality, self-harm, abuse, guilt, shame, all sorts of the things you mentioned. The difference between what a psychologist experiences, because we always say you're not trained like a psychologist. So yes, one huge difference between psychologists and y'all is that we're trained. I was trained on what to do with someone who self-harms. If I hadn't been trained, it would have been probably too much for me, feeling responsible for solving that problem. In other words, getting in my mind, originally it was to get them to stop self-harming. Then I learned that's not the way to approach it. But that's an expert trained me. Not only did y'all not have any of that training across rape, incest, domestic violence, suicidality. Not only did you not have training, I learned very quickly from my trainers as a psychologist that it wasn't my job to fix the problem. That it was my job just to do my best to help them, and then it's up to them. And honestly, after the first little bit, once I sent them on their way, I didn't carry it with me home. I'm just like, well, I'm doing my best to help them. If they figure it out, great. If they don't, I can't wear that.
Yeah.
Y'all, it seems like y'all felt the added burden of fixing the problems, which to me is, and tell me if I'm wrong, to me would just be beyond what I could have handled. Tell me if I'm wrong.
No, that goes to the training that you spoke about. You were, as part of your training as a professional therapist, you were trained to disengage and to do the things you described, which allowed you to leave it at work and go home. The lack of training we were given included not doing that. We were, if not overtly, we were at least alluded to that we were responsible for these people 24/7, and we needed to make sure that it was carried through to get them the help they needed. I learned very early, having to make a call to the 1-800 number when a child had been violated in our ward. I learned very early when I spoke to the legal office. I'm avoiding the names because I can't bring it to mind right now. That in Washington, where
Child Protective Services kind of thing?
No, the church's legal office.
Curtin McConaughey.
Yeah, that 1-800 number Bishop's call. In Washington, the ecclesiastical penitent privilege thing, I was not a required reporter, and that was made very clear to me when I made that call. And it became apparent to me, I read it differently than I do now, and I admit I may be seeing it cynically now, but I read it differently then that it was, I need to not take this on because I need to protect the church, make sure these people get help, and I'm not the one to do that, so I got to go find somebody that can help them professionally. And I learned that lesson pretty early. I have some cynicism now that the advice I was given was biased heavily towards protecting the organization and making sure my actions didn't bring liability to the organization vice helping the person. They were compassionate, they were kind, they brought some reasonable things, but their whole thing was to make sure that I understood what I was legally required to do in the state of Washington.
If I could add just a few thoughts, I had to look up a Boy K. Packer talk first and foremost, when you said you called the stake president said, you need to ask more questions. Let's just give the stake presidents a little grace too. They also don't know what the heck they're doing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right? So most of them, the only difference is they make more money than most people. Right? They've worked their way up. But this just came to mind. Elder Boyd Packer, said, "True doctrine understood changes attitudes and behavior." Everybody's heard these quotes. The study of the doctrines of the gospel will improve behavior quicker than the study of behavior will improve behavior. That is why we stress so forcefully the study of the doctrines of the gospel. We take a quote like that and we think, yeah, I'm not a therapist. Yeah, I don't have an education, but I've got the doctrine of Jesus Christ. And because I have that, it trumps a 4, 5, 6, 7-year degree. So why am I not validated to give my 2 cents on the matter? To me, that's a little terrifying now that I see it from this perspective, because I am not skilled in that way. But as a bishop with this kind of programming, I'm better than a skilled person.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that feeling of the bishop or the stake president knows better because of their keys and their calling is found in the members. The sexual abuse situation that happened in my ward, the mother called me when she found out that it had happened and said, "What do I do?" And I said, "Call the police." And she was like, "Really? Is that what I should do here?" And I look back on that like, your first inclination after your child has been sexually abused is to call the bishop and say, "What do I do? How do I know something's happened and it's horrible." And part of me is grateful she called and that I had an opportunity to talk and to help, but that deference to a bishop who has no training, no idea. And to this day, I don't know why I said, I was on vacation, but I immediately just said, "Call the police." And I'm so grateful I did. But I knew in the back of my head I needed to call this 1-800 number too. And I knew I needed to go down that road. And but there is this pedestal that we're put on as leadership in the church, and it permeates throughout the ward. They really truly look at you as, "I don't know what to do in this situation. Please tell me what to do." And I'm like, I sell T-shirts and hats. Why would I know how to handle this situation? My training has nothing to do with this, and it's very scary.
To add to that, when you call these hotlines, like I had a member once that had a newborn baby that was just so frustrated. They said, "I almost threw her out the window because she wouldn't stop crying." And you hear that and you're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
That's heavy. Do I need to call DHS? So you call the hotline and you tell them, and they're like, "Well, Bishop, I'll leave it to you, but, this is what I would do."
Yeah.
But I don't know. You know that person. I'm like, do I really?
Right.
I've been in their home once. I see them on Sunday. I don't hardly ever talk to them outside of a handshake. Do I know them? No, honestly. And now you take that home and you sit on that for months or even years, and you wonder, did I make the right call? Is something going on over there that I need to be aware of? Do I need to go set up a hidden camera at their house? It's just not healthy.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the core topics that all of us had learned in our bishop experience, one of the lessons that I taught the young men last year in this kind of expansive spirituality lessons that I've been teaching them, sharing with them, is the idea of the locus of control, or the idea of an internal looking inward versus looking outward. And the way that the Mormonism in which I was raised in and certainly learned on my mission was that we're always to look outward to a source, whether that's to God or to Christ or to a prophet or to a bishop. And so when we're in that structure of not trusting ourselves, right? We are the natural man. We are corrupt and broken and cannot be trusted. Therefore, we must look to an outward source for guidance in all things. Then we put people like the bishop in that position where we're going to them for things that we just shouldn't be going to them for. And that's what results in the mother calling you and saying, hey, like my child was molested, what do I do? I had multiple couples come and break up in my office, like permanently, like I'm leaving you, I'm divorcing you, this is over. Or call me over on a late night and be like, this is it, we're done. And then actually, yes, get divorced. And I think, you know, and with the molestation, with abuse cases as well, I remember a brother confessing to me that he abused his child. And I just let him speak. And then when he was done, I said, is there anything else? And I let him finish. And then I said, are you calling Child Protective Services or am I?
Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah, I think, you know, we have risk here of remembering all of the things that were struggles for us because they're poignant.
Yeah.
But I also think, discernment capabilities aside, that because I knew I was the point person, I could step into the breach and do what I could. There was a happy memory that brought this up. And I may not know what I'm doing. I say this cliche all the time. Experience is that thing you get the moment after you needed it. But as you step in and say, I will help you, and if you have the humility to recognize that you don't have the skills, but you do have resources, and I did enjoy that as a bishop. I did enjoy being able to say, man, I have no idea what to do with that, but I know somebody that can get us started. And even for simple things like youth who are worried about things that are happening with their bodies and their sexual desires and stuff that is natural in the course of their puberty, I felt good, although I wasn't trained at all and barely did what I needed to for my kids to help them. I felt good being able to provide relief. It was mentioned in the list that you read, Beau. I had a person in my ward who called me from the side of the road. He was in his pickup truck and he had a shotgun. And he said he was going to do something and kill himself, and he didn't know what to do. And, you know, what do you do with that? You could call emergency services and lights and sirens could show up. I was afraid of that. I drove to where he was. It wasn't very far away. And we talked. And I got the gun and I got him into a hospital. We did get an ambulance and got him into a psychiatric care facility. And as far as I know, he's okay. I mean, this was a long time ago, as you heard in my introduction. But if he had not had a person to call, what would have happened? So I did enjoy, I don't think it was status or things like that, but I did enjoy being able to be the person that could provide immediate, choose these paths. You could go here or here, or provide relief. And I think as I look back, before I became disenchanted and started the deconstruction thing later in the stake presidency time, when I look back before then, being a bishop was rewarding because of those kinds of opportunities. Some of them are dramatic, like the shotgun on the side of the road. Most of them were helping couples or youth recognize that the thing they're so worried about is really minor in the scale of things, and they can focus on other, you get what I'm saying. You can re-vector their mind so that they're dwelling on what's positive. I did enjoy that quite a lot.
Yeah, and I think those are some of the most special experiences that we have as bishops, right? Is being able to be uniquely suited for, maybe not suited for, but be positioned to be able to to be invited into someone's life, or even be able to insert ourselves into someone's life, to be able to be that listening ear or that voice or that influence in their life and make an impact. I mean, that those are certainly the memories for me that were so impactful. And I think where it becomes challenging is asking that question of why. Like, why is it to the bishop? And is that healthy? That for very large things and all the way to minute things, that we are trained to go to that source versus looking inward for that source. And there's got to be a balance of it, right? I'm not saying that like we should all just live on an island, right? It's not always inward, but being able to learn how to trust ourselves, I think is critical.
Yeah, and being bishop gives you a real you get access to people's lives in ways that you don't otherwise. Like, you're involved in every baby blessing and every baptism, and every sick child wants a bishop to give them a blessing. And you do have these great opportunities to be really involved in people's lives.
Did you say marriages? Did you say marriages?
Marriages, performing funerals. So you are a key figure in some very big monumental steps in people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And it's humbling, and it's very, those are the fond memories I have. You know, I don't believe in the power of any of that really, but to be invited into a family's life in that way is that was a very good part of being a bishop, and very much a highlight is to be a part of that. And the sad flip side of it is you're just woefully unprepared when the real heavy stuff comes in.
Yeah. You turn into, it's kind of the difference between being a counselor in the bishopric and being a bishop. Counselors, when a bishop has like a Tuesday night, full schedule, a counselor has to just sit in the foyer and be there.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for 3 years, 3.5, almost 4 years. And I won't lie, I was a little envious. Like he's in there having this moment. People come out crying or laughing or whatever. And I've literally sat here for 4 hours, like took a few naps, read a few things, scrolled my Facebook feed a few times.
You weren't studying your scriptures, Nick?
Heck no, I've done that for too long. I needed a break. But do you know what I mean? It was like, oh, I want some of that.
Yeah.
I'm away from my family just sitting here.
Yeah.
So my heart goes out to the counselors in so many ways, because they're kind of the unsung hero in the story who do a lot of work. Yeah, they don't have to deal with a lot of the garbage, but yet they have to be away from their families as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think they don't get recognized. So maybe I just take this moment to say it. You counselors who are currently in the church, we feel you. We've been there. We see you. And that's not an easy thing. But I assure you, the bishop hat freaking sucks. You don't want that either. What you want is to just go home and be with your family.
I've always said if somebody wants to be bishop, they deserve to be bishop.
Yeah.
Can I rifle around that question?
Yeah.
So just literally 2-second answers. Overall, like, rewind to your believing Mormon selves. If you were given the option of being a bishop or not, and no one would care, no one would know, God would love you either way, it's just between you and what you want to do, would you say yes, Jedd?
Back then, yes. I didn't turn down callings.
No, but now.
Oh, now, no.
So
I would not want to be bishop again, no.
Okay. Rob?
So as I understand it, not having deconstructed.
Yeah, like, did it suck so much that now if you were given the same option, taking away any celestial implications, would you accept it or turn it down?
So that's conditional. I would do a number of things, particularly with my family, very differently.
Yeah, I love that answer.
The serving people and working and helping them resolve things, that doesn't require a calling. I enjoy doing that kind of thing. But I would do things very differently about how I prioritized in my life if I were to accept that calling.
But would you accept it?
If I still...
If there were a secular bishop position, would you accept it?
Oh, that's a different question.
Okay, it's hard to ask a perfect question.
I know, but probably not.
Okay.
No. There's enough to do with my children, my grandchildren, my wife, no.
You're saying it's too much.
I think it is. I enjoy being retired now, but having a job, no. That time belongs to them, and they should have it. I would not take
Beau?
it again.
I would say yes, if my wife were to be the bishop and I could be her first counselor.
Okay. All right. And Nick?
No.
You'd say no.
Hell no. It's so much of what a bishop does is just really no one's business. It's made their business because that's what they feel like they have to do. And I'm not interested in other people's business. So I'm out.
Interesting.
I got to tell you, I really like that resonates with me very much.
A lot of what a Mormon bishop does is nobody's business. Wow,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah. I don't want to hear it.
Yep.
It's kind of policing morality, policing behavior.
Yeah.
You're a hall monitor, man. And I'm not interested in that.
And that is factual. So even from the top, right? So when you go back and look at the way that the presidency has handled sexuality, it's an amazing history. Okay, one of my therapists, Daniel Burgess, his whole focus is on LDS male sexuality, and he's writing a book on the history of LDS sexuality teachings. And so he's allowed me to read this book. And so in 1981, the First Presidency wrote a letter to all bishops, okay? And it's the blowjob letter.
This is Spencer W. Kimball.
Yeah,
right?
Spencer W. Kimball.
Yeah.
First Presidency signed. Oral sex is against the law of chastity, okay? You cannot be worthy and perform oral sex.
He's missing out. That's all I can tell him. Sorry, bro. You never had any of that in your life.
I would love to have seen that, that
Did they read that across the pulpit?
No, of course not. But it went out to all state presidencies and bishoprics. Okay. And then I'm sure the next Thursday they went back into quorum meeting. And half of them are like, bro. Well, whatever happened, 6 months later, they sent a new letter out to all bishops and stake presidencies that says the personal affairs of a couple are not to be questioned by a bishop or stake president. When did you know that? When were you taught that as a bishop? Never.
Never.
Okay. Second question. When was masturbation taken out of the official church handbook? What year?
Was it ever in?
Yes.
Yeah, I had no idea about that.
Yes, it was. When was it taken out?
I'm only super familiar with the current handbook personally.
2010. It was taken out. Never announced. Just like everything else.
Just
taken out. Okay. And yet, by tradition, it just continues to be taught. The tighter, the better.
What do you mean the tighter the better?
What I mean is the more orthodox, the better. Holding to whatever standard you thought there was from some past leader. And that is generally what gets passed on. So when I became bishop, I have all sorts of people coming to me confessing to masturbation. Okay? And one of them came, young couple in the ward, and he came to me and he said, hey, Bishop, we were in a temple recommend interview, and I asked about law of chastity. Do you live the law of chastity? And he said, yes. And he said, sometimes I masturbate, but like my wife knows that. But actually, sometimes I masturbate like when I'm on the road traveling, but like I don't tell her. And I'm like, okay, well, that's breaking the law of chastity. And I came down on him and I said, listen, like you got to talk to your wife. And I actually went to their house that Sunday and I sat down with both of them and I said, you've got some things you need to clear up. And he told his wife. And I made a huge deal out of this thing. And it was not a huge deal because this was part of their marriage. They were okay with it. This was like months into being bishop. Okay. And so then I start getting these different cases of people coming to me talking about masturbation and asking me or confessing me or asking what the church's position is on this. So I look in the handbook, nothing. So I sent an email to my stake president and I line out these 5 cases within my ward, all revolving around masturbation. And he responds and he says, we have no instruction on masturbation. To which I respond, it would probably be helpful then if we can discuss this as bishops so that we're all on the same page.
You know, my question for that is, and this refers to yesterday, then why are members of the stake presidency and even bishoprics adding that question to the temple recommend interview?
Exactly.
If there is no direction, which I know there's not,
Yep.
why is it a thing?
Yep.
What's causing this to become a thing, and why is it everywhere? Because I've had it asked me in
Same here.
Littletown, Mississippi, right? It's made its way all the way down there.
Yeah.
So why?
Yeah.
Could I go more broadly? This is something I struggled with, and I have a little mental model that I use. And I'll tell a story quickly about a policy that came out from an area authority. An area authority is a man who's set apart, and they generally preside over what's called a coordinating council. And in our area, that coordinating council was about 12 stakes, and the stake presidents meet with them, and that's their line of accountability is up to that area authority, that area 70. And we had one when I was a bishop, may have been while I was in the High Council. Nonetheless, we had one that said, women may not offer prayer, opening prayer and sacrament meeting, because it's a priesthood meeting and the priesthood has to offer that. And that became policy. Mm-hmm. And we operated under that for a year or two. But the generalization I want to make is I find even in sexuality, even in just basic administration of funds and so forth, there's a circle of doctrine, which you could go find in places like the scriptures. There is a circle of policy, which then involves the handbook of instructions and the meetings you have when general authorities roll around and invite all the bishops and so forth to come sit at their feet. And then the outer circle is tradition, which individuals, because of their own leanings, their own bias, will use doctrine or policy as a reason to invoke what becomes a new tradition or a new unwritten rule. So many of the things that we had to observe and exercise by as bishops were unwritten, from simple things like where the counselor sits to who gets the sacrament first, and you could go on and list these things. And I think that is bishops having to decide where they have to be solid on something and where they can relax is where this bishop roulette that we hear about in the post-Mormon community comes in. There are bishops that will take interpretation and do what is well for people, and there are bishops like me, who was a naval officer, who knew the handbook backwards and forwards, and I would administer based on what I thought was doctrine, and I admit ranging into policy. I think that's a risk for bishops that are called having to operate. Where do they fall? And it depends on their personality and their stake leadership as well.
And there's three things that come to mind there. One is just a natural cultural residue of old things persisting that doesn't necessarily require any bad actors or nefarious scheming. It's just the way humans work. You tend to do or enforce or conform to what you experienced. That's kind of one level. A second level is like a conscious sort of like, Boyd K. Packer, I think, gave a talk once called The Unwritten Order of Things, where it's just like, hey, it's whatever we put in the manual, but then like those who know.
Yeah.
And then they enforce kind of the more rigid orthodoxy.
And that's what I meant by getting tighter and tighter and tighter.
Okay.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. But then the third is like this nefarious plausible deniability thing where you think, well, these Kurt McConkie lawyers coordinating with correlation at church headquarters just don't like the look of masturbation being forbidden. So we're going to take it out of we're going to intentionally take it out of the handbook of instructions, but we're going to make sure in our verbal trainings the mentorship of area or stake presidents to bishops, that still gets passed on. But we want plausible deniability.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to navigate those 3 different levels, but all of those levels occur to me.
Yeah.
I wanted to, for your third point, the pornography and masturbation was absolutely taught at a stake level to be asking that specifically to the men and the youth.
See, that's what I was thinking.
Right, like
it was for you.
My
Yeah.
stake president, we would go to the bishops' round table or whatever, bishopric trainings, and the discussion would be, rather than ask, do you keep the law of chastity, why aren't we asking, when was the last time you masturbated?
Yeah.
And this
and
is why it's a problem in the church.
Right. Yeah.
Because it keeps getting talked about.
Yeah.
It
And-
keeps getting brought up, and people, their curiosity sparks, and all of a sudden they're in this rabbit hole
Yeah.
of guilt and shame, and then it's just perpetual
And
from there.
I've told this to a lot of people since I stopped believing and stepped away. The amount of times I think about masturbation and pornography, 5% as much as I did when I was in the church.
Exactly.
Like, if it's not in front of your face all day long, it really isn't an issue. But when every priesthood meeting you go to, it comes up, that becomes like the biggest boogeyman. And to the church's credit fault, they did pull it out of the handbooks. They do have that deniability, and that's really frustrating. And it puts bishops in a really bad spot to police things that they're told to police, but technically shouldn't be. And it's rough.
Have you noticed that the brethren have stepped away from that in general conference?
Yeah.
There was like, I don't remember the year, but I mean, it was like every conference, there were several talks, and pornography, masturbation came up, and they learned, oh, we're the problem.
Yeah, we used
We're creating more,
I
not
used
less.
to say all the time, I don't need to go to priesthood session because I don't need to hear about gambling and porn anymore. I've heard it enough.
Great point.
Yeah, well, part of me has always wanted to give the church leaders the benefit of the doubt that they wouldn't be scheming and nefarious. And I still want to always have that best faith assumption, but learning that stake presidents and area authorities are providing off the books training that's more orthodox and rigid and harmful. I mean, it makes me go one of three ways: either super angry, or blame the stake or area presidents that they're the middleman. I remember talking to Elder Holland once, the Mormon apostle, and him telling me, you don't understand how difficult it is for all these mid-level managers, meaning mission presidents, temple presidents, stake presidents, area authorities, who go off book because they're ambitious, and they ratchet things up, whether it's like unhealthy baptism statistics on missions, or, weird area president agendas for their area. And I don't think the apostles feel like they have a total control over what area authorities do.
That's fair.
But if the church is intentionally allowing area authorities and stake presidents to teach an embarrassing level of doctrinal rigidity that's harmful, I'm upset about that.
Yeah, so am I. And it does go into the bishop roulette, and then you get general authority roulette. So
area authority,
area authority,
or even stake
roulette.
president roulette. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe apostle roulette.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It goes all the way up, guys.
It does. And in the Oakland stake, where I served, I don't know that it's the most progressive stake in the entire world, but it's got to be top 3. Okay.
It's like Berkeley, Cambridge.
It is.
It's Manhattan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so, Berkeley Ward is in the Oakland stake.
Yeah.
The Oakland Ward is in the Oakland stake.
Yeah.
Like it is, and we loved it, and we were proud of it. And so that was the culture in which we really promoted, and it was very much just everyone's welcome. And so, people, wards like the Berkeley ward for the last 2 decades, which means the last 2 bishopric cycles, has had a female bishopric. We have had 3 women on the stand that were called as special assistants to the bishop because they can't be given the official title as a female bishopric, but they're in all bishopric meetings, all bishopric councils, PEC, ward council, everything. They are, in essence, the female bishopric. It's been that way for 10 years. Oakland ward, same thing. And that's just how it is, and as it should be. And then a Area Authority 70 came into town for state conference. He caught wind of this. He began poking around. He went to the Berkeley ward. He saw it in action, and he shut it down. And he went to Salt Lake, and he got their permission, whatever happened. I don't know the details. And he came back, and now there can be no women on the stand. And then it went outside of the Oakland stake, and turns out down in Palo Alto and San Mateo, they're doing the same thing. Shut it down. And so now my friend Amy Jensen has this movement of women on the stand, which is in General Conference. We have women on the stand. We should have that representation for our daughters and our wives and the women at church. And it just goes to show that just these random acts of someone who's like, I don't like that. That threatens the patriarchy. That threatens an unspoken, unrecorded rule. And so I'm going to shut it down.
I'm frustrated by that, though. Think about this. They're aware of that, and they shut that down, but they're also aware of bishopric members, stake presidency members, asking specific questions. They're aware of that. They let that play.
Yep.
Go ahead and do that thing. We're aware of that. We're fine with that.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to women having a little more power in this patriarchy, I remember getting a letter recently from the church talking about people praying to a mother in heaven and how wrong it was.
Yep.
They're going to make official letters for that. But it's perfectly fine to sit down with a 13-year-old girl and have her tell you about her masturbation, experiences. And then it's not only perfectly fine for her to tell you that, it's perfectly normal for you to ask more details about it. And they don't stop that. And they know what's going on. That really
Well, not just
gets
stop
under my
that.
skin.
You're, as the bishop, you're the judge in Israel who has to ask her in order for her to go to the temple.
Yeah.
So
Like my
you're the
wife
gate.
yesterday, told to go to the temple and sit in the parking lot as punishment.
Yeah.
A 15-year-old girl? What does that do for her life in a very, very important developmental stage of her life?
Yeah.
That does so much harm. It does zero good, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Zero. Oh, I get bothered by it, guys. I'm sorry.
I don't want to make excuse, but I've rationalized in my mind why this dissonance in this policy doctrine tradition where there is very specific control over very specific issues and there then very broad margin with others. And the dissonance comes from an organization who espouses direction from deity and behaves exactly like a corporation, where plausible deniability, as John said, is necessary so that they can not be held to account for things that are done wrong by people they supposedly have authority over. And I think that's where these problems, in its base, originate. I agree that those questions that you've described should not be asked. But I have to say, when I was a bishop, I was not trained to ask those things. But when I sat in disciplinary councils, those things were modeled before me. And I think it natural that a person would mimic the leadership model that they're in. This is really, I draw an analogy. I was a type of parent that my children are determined they're going to do differently. I said the same thing about my parents. But when I look at their parenting, I can see myself and my wife all through their parenting, and they are doing differently. So they do what they have seen and learned, and then they incorporate things that are maybe better. And I, in a delay, incorporate those same things as I work with my grandchildren. I see this with church leadership. These are octogenarians and older that are putting their life experience into the things they think are important. They see their children, their grandchildren, we can go several generations as we look at leadership looking down into the wards, doing things very differently than they grew up in. And it takes them 20, 30 years, and what I can see, to catch up to what society has recognized, not as acceptable, as correct. And I think that is going to be a problem as long as leadership in the church believes they have the say and don't receive counsel from women, from LGBTQ communities, from others who are not part of their professionals, from others who are not part of their sphere of experience that they're making these policies from. Mm-hmm. I think that's a corporate behavior thing. And if you look at business that doesn't look at the marketplace, those businesses fail. And those chickens are coming home to roost. That's why we see people like us who were in, I think, one of the most committed positions one can accept, speaking the way we are today. Mm-hmm. And feeling the way I have for a number of years. I don't know what the fix of that is, other than to recognize that they don't have all the answers and they need to listen to people who are actually struggling with the problems that they're trying to control. They're not solving yet, they're controlling behavior instead of solving issues to make life better for people that are linked with them in the church. That was soapboxy. I apologize.
I love it.
Rob, that was spot on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can I ask a little follow-up question for us about that? Like, I'm thinking of those things that are more tradition than policy or doctrine. Did you ever try to break that tradition and get any kickback or feedback? Because I noticed I wore a beard off and on, and
As a bishop?
As a bishop.
What the?
And out of spite for the last 4 years, because of a conversation I had with the stake president, I would refuse to shave it.
Well, never Mormons don't know that bishops are generally forbidden in Orthodox church culture. At BYU, the churches, universities, you have to have a beard card, which is like a note from your doctor saying you have a skin condition, or you're not allowed to wear a beard at the university. And top church leaders just never wear beards.
Yeah.
Right? But that's not official as bishop?
It's not. Well, it's not in the handbook.
It's not in the handbook, but it is official.
It's official, and it's one of those tradition things. The funny thing that would happen to me is I'd walk into sacrament meeting with a bit of a beard, and half the ward... As a bishop, half the ward wouldn't shake my hand. The next week I'd shave. They're all back shaking my hand.
Wow.
And it finally came to a head.
That's the Lord enforcing on the bishop.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. And I finally got to a point where I'm wearing it. I don't care. We're done with this. And it became a non-issue after that.
And then soon you left the church.
Yeah.
It was the beard that made you go.
The beard was it. The second thing I did
is the beard.
Is we moved the sacrament to the end of sacrament meeting instead of the beginning. I didn't tell anyone. That's just what we did. And there was this like confusion out there, and people thought we forgot about it or the bread wasn't there or something. That one actually was received very positively, where people came and said that was nice to do it different, so we got out of the routine and focused on something different. And so I had these conflicting experiences with tradition / policy, where I'd try to play around with that, and some of it went really well and some of it went really bad. I'm curious if any of you, the rest of you, had anything like that.
We had a great experience in our ward, if I can share. I had this epiphany last March to do the sacrament ordinance differently. You know, when you're sitting on the stand, you see everyone. And when you recognize that while the sacrament hymn is being sung and the bread is being broken, and even while it's being blessed, people are on their phones. And they could be reading the scriptures, but they're probably playing Candy Crush, you know? And
I was playing Candy Crush.
Wait, is the bishop on the stand?
Oh, yeah.
This is Bishop's Gone Wild.
awesome.
This is an episode of Bishop's Gone Wild. Keep going.
So I was like, we have to change the dynamic. Because for our ward, Christ was the center. He was always the topic of discussion. It was never anything but Christ. And the reason we're there is the sacrament, which is centered in Christ. Well, we have this ritualistic thing where, you know, we have a sacrament hymn. The bread's broken while the priests stand up. They break the bread while the song's being sung. Then they bless the bread and water. And I thought, well, let's do things different. Let's sing a hymn, and then in just pure meditative silence, let's break the bread, bless the bread, administer it, bless the water, administer it. And it was like a pin could drop. Like everybody was like, this is awesome. It was totally different. But of course, after a month of that, I just said, I want to do things different. That whole month, I said, I want to do things different. I went to Moroni 6. If you feel like preaching, preach. If you feel like praying, pray. Quit having this agenda for sacrament. And so I said, I'm not going to ask anybody this month to speak. If we need to sit up here in silence, well, then we'll sit in silence. But let's just go with the Spirit. And while we're at it, let's do the sacrament differently. Let's focus on Him rather than pick Candy Crush or whatever else, Change things up so we can rekindle why we're there. It was so powerful. Until one member complained to a stake presidency member. He's a rogue bishop doing a bad thing. He's grown a beard, and I did. And you know why I grew a beard? Because my wife thinks I'm hotter with a beard. And because of that...
Jesus wore a beard.
Jesus wore a beard. But
Brigham Young wore a beard. Every Mormon prophet from like Brigham Young to like whoever was right before David O. McKay, they all wore beards. Yep. What the freak, church?
Given our current stake president's like, as long as it's well-groomed, grow a beard. He's totally nuanced in that area. But I was blown away because in the handbook it says, a song is sang while the bread is broken. And that's what this little tight ass, turned to. And he shut it down. He was a counselor. And people were heartbroken. They were like, man.
Wait, this is one of your bishopric counselors?
No, a stake presidency member checking me.
Okay.
And they said, no more. And members were mad about it. But I was just trying new things because new things are what help develop getting out of the repetitious garbage that we tend to just repeat over and over and over again. But they wouldn't even let that happen. I mean, for crying out loud, it took an extra 2 minutes out of the meeting. Mm-hmm. And it made all the difference in the spirit of the meeting. And here's the thing that made me the most mad. I was like, have you been to the ward and experienced it firsthand? They never had.
Yeah.
They just shut it down.
Right.
So, like you, I mean, we were trying new things.
Yeah.
We were doing new things to try to, and I pray to God that stake presidents and bishops are watching this and they do something like this, because this is what these people are craving. They're literally coming to church every Sunday looking for something to help them feel like they're going to make it through to the next week.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And most of the time, they leave empty.
Yeah. They want to be fed.
They want to be fed.
Yep.
So feed them.
Did you get any feedback from your ward because of the beard? And I'm asking that because I had almost the people that wouldn't shake my hand, there's that group. And then almost all the youth would come up and say, you're just more approachable because you seem real. Mm-hmm. And I'd be up there wearing a pink tie or a bow tie. I'd just try to be me, really. And
my Mormon brain's concerned about you, Bishop Jedd.
it should be.
Like, what is this?
I don't know how I ever got in there, right?
It's traditional tie.
Yeah, and I'd wear a bow tie, and I'd wear, and people would be, and at one point, one of my counselors had a big old ZZ Top beard, and the other one had a big ponytail, and
in Salt Lake Valley,
and the members, like especially the youth, loved it. Like they would come up and they're like, we feel like we can come talk to you. And I was like, that alone right there is enough to keep this going. But then again, there was one person who said that it took away from the spirit of the meeting and complained to a stake president member in a Temple Recommend interview. And then it came back and we had a big blow up about it. But that's when I refused to never shave again. I was like, we're done with that. That conversation's over.
Good for you.
And for the most part, we just stayed up there looking the same way. But a lot of people in the ward really appreciated it. And I'm just curious if you had something like that. It was weird because it's a bipolar issue having a beard.
Yeah, it's a very divided thing. Like
Yeah.
you get people who are like, I love this bishop because he's willing to put himself out there and be vulnerable. And then you got other people who are like, man, he makes me really uncomfortable and I don't know how to react to that. And you could feel that from the people and how they interact with you. So, I mean.
Bishop Beau, did you get innovation pushback?
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. I mean, there were things that I said and just changed that just needed to be changed. For me, the first year, I feel like was kind of like a hunkering down to orthodoxy, which I wasn't raised Orthodox Mormon. And so it was kind of just a safety in the handbook type thing. I read it, I pushed it aside, I gained my confidence, and then I just decided I'm going to do what the Spirit directs. And that was it. And I got my hand slapped multiple times. I got called into the stake presidency multiple times, which they loved me. The stake presidency loved me. But it was also like when I would get called in, it's like, okay, like, easy, down samba. And that's okay. I was okay with that. And I think that's what bishops need to do. There's this, I've heard multiple bishops say something along the lines of like, well, we haven't received instruction on that, right? And it's like, perfect. Perfect. If you haven't received instruction, that means you get to do whatever the Spirit tells you to do. You get to do whatever you want to do. Whatever's right for your people, you now get to do. So do it. Do it. Gain the confidence to lead your people and not wait for a handbook to change, or not wait for the general authority or the stake president or whoever external source is going to tell you what to do. Because guess what? It's going to be different whoever is assigned to you that day. Yeah. So a great beard story. Marlon K. Jensen, when he came to Berkeley, he came to the Oakland stake on
and this guy was a general authority. He was church historian.
Yes. So, and this was 2012. I don't remember what it was, but I was a young bishop, and it was like, cool, Elder Jensen's coming. So he came to our stake conference, and then he held like a fireside kind of on the side. And it was at the Berkeley Chapel, and it was like I invited my evangelical friends. It was all about church history, and it was about, supposedly he was going to talk about how the church was coming clean on church history. And so we were like, let's go. And so he did. He did talk about how the church, it was going to be a new era of transparency for the church. But one of the things that he did, and this is my beard story, that I thought was great, is he had all of the bishops stand up in the leadership training, whatever, for stake conference, and introduce ourselves. And so here I was like this kid, and I'm just like trying to remember my own name, introducing myself. And then Matt Marastica, who's this amazing, super nuanced guy, he's the Berkeley ward bishop. He stands up and he's got this beautiful beard, right? And he introduces himself. I'm Bishop Marastica, Berkeley ward, sits back down. So we all introduce ourselves. There's like 11 units or something like that. And then Marlon K. Jensen, he goes, would the brother with the beard please stand back up? And we're all just going, oh no. And so Matt stands back up, and Marlon K. Jensen, Elder Jesse just goes, I just want you to know that is a beautiful beard.
I love that.
That's all. Just want you to know that. And I said, that was so cool that the area or the general authority is giving a shout out to our bishop who has the confidence against anyone who's telling him to shave, or any of his ward members who think he's apostate by having a beard, that bishop has the confidence to know who he is and what his flavor of bishop is to wear that beard. And that one time, and probably only one time in his 5 years of serving as bishop, was he validated. And I thought it was pretty cool.
Good story.
You know what I notice so much is you'll call the stake presidency, and often the advice is use the spirit of discernment, Bishop, except for when they don't like the way you discern. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It's like good discernment when they like it.
Yep.
But when they don't like it, it's like,
And that's every member,
was that
right?
discernment?
Isn't that
Yeah.
every member?
Yeah. Always.
Yeah.
So this corporate comment I made earlier, when I was in the stake presidency, we would use things like beards on bishops, not white shirts on priests, to discern people, better word, detect people who were coming out of the lane. Mm-hmm. And when you visit a ward once every 10 weeks, or if you doubled up on a day, but you visit and you see these things, you see nonconformity, it provides an opportunity to ask the question, what else is not being conformed with? And you start getting into how are funds being handled? How are the doctrines of the church being handled? I had that mindset as part of what I did, roaming from ward to ward, supporting the bishops in what they're doing. And some of them would do things that were innovative and so forth. But I agree, not too innovative, because the handbook says these things. I think that is a problem, that the way policy and doctrine are promulgated within the church, they allow some room and they expect stake presidencies to monitor what the congregations are doing under the bishop, because they do have some latitude, not because they're granted latitude, but because there's vagueness in the statements that are in the policy documents.
Yes. Absolutely. And they know what they're looking for, just like you did as a stake presidency member. You knew what you were looking for. And there are dog whistly things that you can look for or ask for to know who your loyal next leaders are. I remember I had no idea how a stake president was called, but I'd been serving as bishop for a few years. And then I went to a bishop's council meeting, which happened every few months. And the stake president handed out these one-sheeter papers, and it was an application for stake president. And I was like, what is this? And so we were all to take them home and fill them out, because the new stake president was going to be called and a general authority was going to be coming into town. And he wanted to interview all of the past bishops, current bishops,
And
high council, and stake presidency members. And so we all filled out our applications, and it was literally like a job application. And then we were all to show up at the chapel at a certain time. And so it was interesting. I showed up at the chapel and I walked in the room, and there was this elder who I recognized. I had listened to multiple of his conference talks, and I actually really enjoyed his talks. And so I was kind of excited to meet him. And he was like 6'7", like Idaho farm boy. I walk in and he looks at me and his first question was, "How old are you?" And I said, I'm 35. Oh, okay. You look like you're 25. I'm like, okay. And he, have a seat. So we sit down, and he starts looking at my thing and going down. And he's asking me questions. And then he goes, "Is your wife an activist?" I said, "Is my wife an activist? What do you mean? I don't understand the question." And he said, "Is your wife an activist?" And I said, "My wife is not an activist. I don't know where you're going with this, but my wife is not on social media. She's not super vocal. Like, my wife is a feminist. My wife is very, like, opinionated. She's not an activist." And he goes, "Okay." And what I learned was, one more thing that he asked me. He said, "What do the members of the Oakland Stake need?" And I gave an answer about inclusivity and love and coming unto Christ. And I felt good about it. And then I left. And that night, we had our Oakland Stake priesthood leadership training meeting. And he came in like tearing into that meeting to rebuke us as priesthood leaders. And he said, "I met with 25 of you today. And he said, you all think in the Oakland Stake that you are so special. That's what you think." And he said, "I travel the world. I go to stake conferences all over the world, and I'm telling you right now, you are not special. What you need to learn is that you need to learn to follow the prophet. That's what you need to learn to do.
That's just evil.
Not be inclusive, not bring everyone in, or whatever other answers you gave me. You need to learn to follow the prophet, period." And we were all just like 12-year-old little boys, just like, "Okay, sorry." And I learned that day what they were looking for, or at least what he was looking for, right? And the loyalty, and his question about my wife being an activist, and what a dog whistly thing that was to ask.
As soon as Beau was, sorry, Jedd, I'll come right to you, but as you were telling that story, powerful story, I looked right at Rob, because what that reminds me of is boot camp.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like chain of command.
Yep.
Let's just make sure everybody knows at the end of the day who's in charge.
For sure.
You were nodding, Rob. What, were you thinking that or not?
It comes across that way. I mean, it's a hierarchical organization, and when one accepts continue with the Navy analogy, when one accepts that the commanding officer of a ship has the say, but delegates that authority to people unless they get out of line, and you can see that kind of behavior in the church. I do agree with that. I think that there was an expectation, certainly from me as a bishop, and then again in the stake presidency to reinforce it, of complying with what the brethren, it was follow the prophet, but it was also the brethren, when they would come and say something, it was something we were expected to take a turn on and do better, more of, whatever the adjective is.
Mm-hmm.
But Jedd, really quick. Then.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Beau's story about that process of calling a new stake president. And I went through one round of that. And my wife told me recently that she felt guilty that I didn't get promoted into the stake presidency or as stake president because of something she was doing, because of her faith not being strong enough. And she felt that they knew that. And so to go to that question about your wife, is she an activist? Like that patriarchy carries through, and my wife felt a burden and a guilt for me not getting a calling. And I mean, that's just like you said, Nick, it's just evil. Like, that's just harsh that she would have any type of feeling for me not getting a promotion. That doesn't make any sense to me, but that's just the nature of how these callings work.
Let's take just a second and recognize, because I've been a part of that process of calling a new stake president and the application, and there's a list of names that they say in the order they're going to be interviewed and the time slots in which they'll be interviewed. And everybody's in there thinking, oh, I know it won't be me. Mm-hmm. But they're all thinking, God, let it be me. and what's sad to me is that they only take 20 to 25 of the top men in the stake to be interviewed. Mm-hmm. So I want to take just a minute and recognize the 3,000 people that know that's happening and that they didn't make the list. Mm-hmm. And how harmful that is for their psyche, and how harmful it is for them to feel like, man, I've got to really step up my game and be better, which means that masturbation thing I'm struggling with, I got to can that. Or that drink I have, I got to get rid of that thing. Or that little sip of coffee, that's the reason I'm not part of that group of men. Mm-hmm. Yep. That is toxic in so many ways, and it's just so unhealthy. I can remember so many men feeling like, oh, and they come to you and they kind of tell you like, I was going to be, but it's just terrible to think. So there's that. And is it okay if I just go back to the masturbation thing for a minute? Not that I'm like hung up on it, but I know if there are current leadership members watching this, I feel a little bit of a little hypocrisy on my own end, because I had person after person come to me with that problem, right? And my answer was, have you told your wife? Or stop doing it. And the reality was, I had an occasional problem with that. But I would justify it by saying, yeah, but I'm doing a lot of good. So mine is pardoned, but theirs is not. I can near guarantee you that there are countless bishops and stake presidents who are doing this very same thing. I want you to know that be vulnerable. This sucks for me to sit in front of a camera and do this live. It's embarrassing. But I don't care anymore, because it means more to me to let people know that they're okay, that there's nothing wrong with them, even if they're in that position and do that thing. There's nothing wrong with you. And for those who are finding this out, who I counseled with and think that I'm a hypocrite, I am telling you, yes, I am. 100%. And I had to live with that. That's all. Sorry.
It's amazing how similar all of our experiences are. The details, the people, they're different, but the experiences are so similar. Really is amazing. And as I'm listening to you, I'm just thinking, oh, brother, you don't need to feel guilty for masturbating. You're married. Like, talk to your wife, have a contract, own your own sexuality, take some Jennifer Finlayson Fife courses, and you're good, bro.
Can I just say, Margie doesn't want to know.
No,
She doesn't care, but she also doesn't want to be my policeman because that's
Exactly.
not good for our relationship.
No,
that-
it's not.
That's
It's really
maybe
not.
one of the things I feel the worst about as bishop was putting couples in a position where they were policing each other like that.
Because that's bad for the marriage. And it also increases the very behavior that the church would want stamped out.
Right. Yeah.
If the church wants to increase masturbation, put the spouse in charge of the other spouse's
That's exactly
masturbation.
right.
And it's going to go gonna skyrocket.
Yeah, and if you
Full
want to
stop.
absolutely completely shut down the spouse's libido, put them in charge of the other spouse's libido.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Like wives, you need to be available for your husbands.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
And
they're
then-
going to masturbate and look at porn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then
So-
they completely shut down.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm not alone in this. Is that true?
You are not
true.
alone.
And I'm not trying to throw people under the bus here, but I feel like people need to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that tactically, there are resources that we don't talk about very openly, and as we begin to expand our faith, either out of necessity or out of curiosity, what happened when I was bishop is I began to collect resources that I didn't know existed, and I had to find them on my own, right? So there's no cheat sheet. So one example is I had this wonderful sister who kept coming to me, and it was like not monthly, but maybe quarterly meetings. And she would come and book an hour with me. And it was like she was hitting this wall in her spirituality where she was doing all of the things. She was temple worthy. She was great mom. She was serving scriptures, all the stuff, right? Check, 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 check. And yet month after month after month, she just felt like there was this wall between her and God. And so we'd have these check-ins again and again and again. And I had this big whiteboard in my office that I installed, and we'd map everything out. And finally, out of desperation, I remember one night just being like, you know what? Like, we were the blind leading the blind. We were the exact same age. I just said, you know what? You're doing all of the things, and they're not doing anything for you. And I walked up to the board, and I just wiped the board clean. And I said, if these aren't working for you, you need to go find what is. And I gave her a blessing, and I sent her on her way. And after these meetings for a long time, she came back to me about a month or two later, and it was the first time that I saw any amount of spiritual progression, because she was now doing things outside of the checklist that were actually feeding her soul. And they were the things that were not taught to her in church. They were not the Deseret approved or church approved books. And what I learned was there's this whole thing called faith expansion. And there's this whole thing about thinking and looking into the shadows and beginning to explore and be curious. And so I began to be curious. And there are great resources for members of the church who are active members of the church who are curious. There's an entire podcast called Faith Matters. There's an entire conference called Restore, in which people like Thomas McConkie and Jennifer Finlayson Fife and Patrick Mason and people who are thinking are speaking and expanding faith. And it is a safe place to explore, and it is a safe place to expand. And so topics from sexuality to Brian McLaren's faith stages, it's safe for members to go and begin to explore their faith and their sexuality and to begin to think.
Today's Mormon Story is brought to you by Restore and Faith Matters. I'm sure they're thrilled.
And the reason I'm saying that, though, right, is to your point where it's just like we have these blocks and we don't know what resources we have. Yeah. And so we just keep doing the same thing again and again and again. And then there's even deeper cut resources like Mormon Stories, right? Like Natasha Helfer, like people who it's like, hey, once you're ready to cut a little deeper, LDS discussions, like it's like now you're ready to go. Now you're ready to dive in Now you're ready to look behind the veil. And those are very helpful resources. And then you get to decide what you do with them. We're all reading the same stuff. We're all listening to the same podcasts, and we get to decide what we do with those things. Bishops get to do that now as bishops and then help their people who are still coming to them navigate their faith expansion.
Wouldn't it be great if it did depend on forward-thinking people holding callings or the bishop roulette rolling right for you? Wouldn't it be great if there were actual paid-for, formal, established resources that ecclesiastical leaders could turn to when a member comes to them, and they don't have to shoot from the hip or depend on their discernment? I think that is one of the best things that could be done for bishops and other ecclesiastical leaders, but for bishops, to actually have resources that provide some of this expansion that Beau has alluded to. Those just aren't available. You have to go out on a limb, and you have to be unable to go find those things if you're going to provide them to the members of your ward. Wouldn't it be great if that was part of the system?
And that's one of the questions. I've got so many questions here I want to talk about. We could literally go all day, and I'm okay for us going as long as we want. But like the Mormon Church in 2024 is certainly worth $250 billion. Certainly beyond question, $250 billion minimum. Like they could afford top-notch world-class training of their bishops, 1,000%. But they don't. So and they almost brag about the fact that their bishops are, quote, lay clergy. And isn't that awesome that we can pull a plumber or a lawyer or a doctor or dentist out and they're leading a congregation. And unlike those Protestants or those Catholics, who have to have training, our bishops, the church is almost like flexing. But the first thing I'm dying to understand is why don't they just provide kick-ass, world-class, comprehensive training?
Great question.
And in my mind, it's a couple things. It's not that they don't have money. So could it be that they don't want the liability? That as soon as they assume more responsibility for the training, then the bishops follow what they do or don't recommend, and then when the bishop gets sued by the member for doing what the church headquarters told them to do, that it increases liability? Like, I don't know how else. So that's one possible explanation. Another possible explanation is that the brethren can't agree on what bishops could or should do. So Packer wants white shirts and ties, and Marlon Jensen or Holland is okay with beards, and so they just avoid the drama. That's a second option. A third option is that they know they need flexibility between Berkeley, Cambridge, and Manhattan, and freaking Draper and Lehigh and Logan and freaking Bountiful and what's the one where Mike Lee lives? Alpine. Or Provo. You know what I'm saying? And so they intentionally, like with this Charlie Bird, Ryan, whatever, where a same-sex married couple is like literally taking the sacrament, holding callings in a ward where for decades these couples were excommunicated.
Or for decades, they've been doing that in the Berkeley and Oakland stake.
Right. But it's like, what if it's like intentional ambiguity to just keep the wheels on the wagon and keep the church from fracturing and fragmenting? Those are three of probably a gazillion different. Rob's jumping into.
I want to provide a fourth.
Okay,
and
great. Yeah.
I'm going to paint another end of a spectrum. The last calling I held in the church was as the stake technology specialist. I'm kind of geeky with gadgets. I understand those things, and I live with those around me. So I was called to do that. And this was in the time when we started broadcasting sacrament meetings and started doing webcasting and so forth. And that was brand new at that time. We had to put these new switches, boxes, effectively in the networks in the building. It was my job to go to the 5 buildings we have and install those. And as I prepared for that, I had to spend a considerable amount of time learning what it was, how to do it, get the equipment there, how to troubleshoot. And I got to building 5 and I could not figure it out. So I called the facilities manager that would help me. And he says, well, I've got a contractor in there. He'll be over there in about 20 minutes. And that guy took, I'm not kidding you, he took 15 minutes to do what I had spent weeks working on. A similar thing, we clean our own buildings. We're now being asked to clean the temples, or members are being asked to clean the temples. So at this end of the spectrum, I think it is about how much money does it cost. I don't think it may be as deep as you were alluding to, John. My cynicism thinks it is, we can save a buck if we do it this way. The bishops aren't doing too bad, so we don't have to spend that money. Yep, we have these things that occur occasionally, but we can resolve them and solve them, and sweeping on the rug's too dramatic, but I'll say it anyway. So I think it's shallower than what you're alluding to, frankly.
So cheapskates?
Okay.
Is that what you're saying?
I didn't say that, but that word is not inappropriate.
Okay.
I'll just add to that thought. I got officially trained on one thing, and it was how to count tithing. That was it. No other trainings that were official other than this is how you count the money, and you better have 2 people in there doing it, and you better see every dollar that goes into that envelope and get it into the bank as fast as you can. And that was it. No other training. And so I agree with Rob that cheapskate or money, there's something there where it sure feels like the money's more important than the people.
Lay ministry keeps the membership dependent on the church leadership and headquarters. Mm-hmm. And that's just simple as that. You start teaching at a local level these kinds of things, they're going to start to see the dysfunction.
I'm going to pile on a little. Guaranteed call the stake president will get is if a ward doesn't make a deposit on Sunday. They will get that call on Monday.
It's like where your concern is, there's your heart also kind of thing.
Sure.
And you're saying it's with the money first.
Too much.
Does everybody agree with that?
Okay, can I tell you guys something? When I stepped down, I had planned on going 2, 3, 4 weeks until the new bishop was called. I'm going to make the stake president mad here, but I'm going to say it. Neither of my counselors were contacted. You had a bishop who stood up, who went rogue. And 2 days went by, and they sat wondering, what are we going to do? It wasn't until my stake president was contacted. And you want to know what the only counsel was given? Don't let him collect the tithing, or don't collect tithing that week. That's it. Not, hey, you conduct, let's do some damage control, let's do this, let's do that. It was, let's just tell people to hold on to their envelopes. That really frustrated me. It's like, where's the concern? Is it the people? Because you have a broken ward right now. And let me tell you, who was it who talked about it? It was like a funeral after your bishop died and you were called to be bishop. I've gotten reports. I've got spies in the ward. Because there are people in the ward who are very nuanced or who are, what is it, PIMOs? P-I-M-O?
Physically in, mentally out.
Physically in, mentally out. Who are like, it was like a funeral.
Yeah.
It was damage control. A member of the stake presidency said, hey, if anybody has any issues with what's happened, we will meet after church and almost have like a rescue. So I have hopes that, like you said, because it was so traumatic, the trauma brings unity, because the Brandon ward in Mississippi needs that more than ever now.
Yeah.
I care that they have that.
Yeah.
I don't want them to fail. I don't want them to suffer. I don't want them to feel like because I did this thing that they can't function anymore at a level that they need to so that they can thrive in life. So I love that you said that, because it made me feel like, oh, I didn't just ruin the ward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll grow through this. They will. They'll grow through this. So I think that as I put myself in the perspective of someone listening, or I think about my parents, or my siblings or my ward members listening to our episode, I think about the people who I served, who I love, and many of which I still minister to and serve. I have many people who were in my ward that I was bishop to who still call me, and we go to breakfast or we go to lunch or we go to coffee or we get together and we just talk. And I still have the privilege of ministering and listening to them. And I think about them listening to this episode, right? And on one hand, I think that someone could listen to this and think, oh, these guys are just bringing up all the negative stuff. And they're just tired, or they're just cynical, or they're just bitter, or they're just exmo, or they're just whatever. Why are they even giving any energy to this? Why can't they just leave it alone? How would you answer that? How would each of you answer that? Why are we doing this?
I can go first just because I addressed this yesterday. I can't leave it alone because I see that it's hurting people that I care about, that I love. And the sad thing is you can reach out to them and tell them things, but I'm learning that I can't even force that on them. Mm-hmm. I can just let them know I'm here for them. And in time, maybe whatever example I've been since I've stepped away can be of significant help for them. But that's painful, mm-hmm. if I'm completely honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I alluded to a little earlier, we as bishop get to be such a integral part in these great celebrations of life with the members in your ward. By necessity, I felt multiple times that I was showing up to a baby blessing just because I had to be there by doctrine. But that family didn't really care for me to be there. You know, they I guess I shouldn't say that. I might feel like maybe they did want me there, but those experiences were so powerful and touching to me. And I wish my experience since leaving the church, we weren't very vocal about it. We didn't make big Facebook posts or anything. We told about a dozen family and friends and kind of left it at that, and then word just spreads. But we have had zero contact from the ward. We've had people when we go on a walk that will turn around and go into their house. We've had a few people that will pull up behind us and say, hey, we miss you. We'd love to see you come back. But we haven't had really any great outpouring one way or the other, with the exception of a few little cases there. And so why I want to come here is to maybe to give a peek behind the curtain a little bit, to see that it's not a glamorous position. It's really hard. It's emotional in all the ways. You see people at their highest of highs and their lowest of lows, and it doesn't get talked about enough. I remember going on my mission thinking that missionaries were these just amazing angels, could do no wrong. You know, and my first companion's just a screw off, and I'm like, wow, what in the this is not at all what I thought this was going to be. But that's good. We need to show that. We need to show the humanity of the people. The church shouldn't be, in my opinion, so rigid and buttoned up. That there's these real issues that people have, and I look back on those issues of helping people through. We had a primary president who got cancer and died within 2 months, and to see the outpouring of love and the group and the ward coming together, and one of her counselors said, "Can we just do a second primary program? Because that's what would make her feel best, is to hear these kids sing again." Mm-hmm. I'm like, "Are you heck yeah? Right now, get it up there. Let's do this." And so you have, I don't want to sound all Debbie Downer on it and that all negative, because there were these great experiences of expressions of love and service and helping. And I'm so grateful that I had that chance to do it. Sadly, there's just this dark underbelly that you have to navigate as well, that deserves and needs to be spotlighted as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say current members of the church, when you finish Come Follow Me for the week and finish reading the Book of Mormon and whatever else that you've got gospel related, pick up Brene Brown's The Power of Vulnerability and read it, listen to it, memorize it, because it's as much scripture as anything you'll ever read. And I would say any of her books and a number of other people who've just given us gifts. That's the thing I have an issue with, because we're always told just study these things. And we don't branch off into the healthy stuff that helps us develop in life and be more successful, not financially, but just successful at life. There's a story where her daughter's in a public place towards the end of the book, and she's kind of just dancing goofy in front of people. And she was a little embarrassed at first. But then something came to her, and in Mormonism, we'd say the Spirit came to Brene and said, "Don't you betray her." She started to dance with her. We need to dance more. We need to be vulnerable. We need to come out in public and just lay out the vulnerabilities that we're dealing with, because you'd be shocked to find that everybody else is exactly the same. And it isn't a vice when you out it. It actually becomes the thing that frees you from the prison that it's put you in.
Yeah, I love Brene. Rob, how about you?
Well, one of the things that John said was, why can't we leave it alone? I distanced myself from the church right after we got released out of the stake presidency. And one of the things that was pivotal, and I won't tell the whole story about this, just marked the time, was the 2015 policy about baptizing children. That we as a stake presidency, my pattern that I had lived was we would receive a letter and maybe even a conference of some sort to understand what was changing in the handbook when it's of a significant nature that this was. But we didn't get that. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't address the questions that my daughter, who was a student, at BYU, any deeper than the rhetoric that I had been given in response to when John broadcast what was going on. And that's emotional, and I regret that. It's in a better place, but why can't I leave it alone? Frankly, I have left it alone. There was opportunity. I just happened to be in town, and I saw John's post about wanting to interview former current bishops, so I responded. And I pick up some of these emotions, including anger, afresh. And I don't have time for it. I am going to set it back down. I will talk to people about my experience, and that's why I came here today. It isn't that my experience is defining for anyone but me, and my family probably, but maybe hearing some of the experience that I have had and these other now friends sitting around me have had, and recognizing how similar there are, one cannot avoid wondering what the thread is that makes them so similar, and trying to draw conclusions to what should shift so those threads no longer connect these experiences that people asked to lead and resolve personal, private issues with people. There are questions that are being asked in quiet rooms and ignored in places where they should not be ignored. Yes. So will I not leave it alone? Who knows? I may get interested in talking about this in a venue like this some other time. But I think it is completely important that this, not just these grumpy old men sitting in front, well, I guess I can just speak for myself, but these men who had negative experiences were just those 4 isolated cases. Don't fool yourself. Don't fool yourself that this is isolated or one-offs or four-offs. This is common experience that if you dig, you will see it. And there are people who are being hurt directly, and there are people whose lives are shifted into the negative with good intent. I'm thinking of my children and the scrupulosity that I expected of them when they were my children and I was bishop. Those issues still exist. Now, having said that, and risking cliche again, when you know better, do better. I think things in my relationship with my children and my wife, most of it, very good, is considerably better now that I have removed this very constricted view of what is possible or where I should apply my effort. As that aperture is opened and I've allowed myself to think about things that are, in some cases, restricted by the church, my life has improved. And it isn't because I'm freer to do what I want to do. That is true. But it is also true that I have gained perspective I could not have had as a white male in this country by expanding my aperture and considering what my daughters think, what my wife thinks, what people of color think, because I can't experience their things until I ask them about it. In the past, I was expecting them to come into the model that was the church instead of me venturing into their world and understanding their perspective and seeing how broad and beautiful those things are.
I'm really glad you brought that up, the opening the aperture, because that's something I'll always be grateful for of being a bishop, was being able to see the depths of humanity and to see all the different perspectives. I had an experience with a young man who came and told me about his struggle with being gay, and it helped me to it really helped me to understand that, one, the church is wrong on this subject, and two, that until you see the pain and feel the pain, you kind of are isolated and insulated from it. And to have that open up, and I mean, this young man just basically told me that he's scared to pray to find someone to fall in love with because he doesn't want to have to choose between marrying the man that he would love versus the church. And I wouldn't have had that experience if I wasn't bishop, and I wouldn't have seen the pain and the heartache that the policies and the doctrine cause to that section of society, that wonderful, beautiful section of society. And I'm grateful that I was able to be allowed into this young man's life enough to start to understand that and grow from it. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of good that comes from being bishop, and a lot that I'll look back on and always be happy and proud of. And then there's just also that other side that we've got to deal with and learn how to put down and put away, or stand up and keep fighting for change.
Beautiful.
Do you want to answer your question, Beau, or do you feel like enough has been said with
I
that
just
question?
think that, I don't know that it's communicating through the podcast, but in this room, it's impossible not to feel the love. It's palpable. Not just the love between us because of our common experience, but the love that we feel and that each of us feel for the people that we served and that we continue to serve and love. It's impossible not to feel the love. And that is what drives it. I mean, there's all the organization and the hierarchy and the patriarchy and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, you feel what you feel. And of all the frustration and all of the stuff, like, you feel the love.
You know, one of my fears stepping away was that I wouldn't feel that, that it would be stripped from me. I met Beau last night. I met Rob last night. Jedd, did I meet you last night? Were
No,
you there? I
wasn't
didn't think
able
you
to
were
come,
there.
yeah.
There's a lot of people there. It was a little overwhelming, but the love I feel for these three guys, like we sat before we came in here and just visited just briefly, and it was an instant, palpable love and admiration. And it's so freeing to recognize that it wasn't Mormonism that gifted me those feelings, but that they exist outside of it. And if I could even argue, they're magnified because there are no walls around that love based on what you have done or who you were.
Or what you were drinking.
Or what you were
were
drinking.
wearing.
Yeah, or what you were wearing. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
I really appreciated your story yesterday, Nick, about going to the dispensary and meeting a girl that 6 months ago you would have thought nothing about, and now is very helpful in you feeling better. And I kind of realized that I started to see the world more in full color when I was able to step away from the Mormon view. And just because someone has a few earrings or a tattoo or all these taboos in Mormonism, I just subconsciously would kind of other them and put them off to the side a little bit. But learning to embrace and talk and seeing how some of my daughter's friends were more comfortable in my home because they, you know, the picture of the temple came down, and that was an oppressive feeling to a young LGBT kid, knowing that meant he was less than and was never going to be there. And then to see them and meet them where they were at, it is freeing. And the amount of love that you can feel for people, it just grew exponentially for me to see it doesn't matter what you do for your job or how you do your hair or any of that. I can find out something about you and we can make a connection, and I can love you for who you are and not have to put this asterisk of be so much better with the gospel in their life. But they're great and perfect as they are. And to see the world that way has just been a great blessing too.
Cool. Thanks, Jedd. John, did you have any other questions that you wanted to?
Oh my gosh, my
Cover?
list is so big. So I'm just sitting here loving this so much. And I'm getting a lot of comments from viewers and listeners saying this is their favorite episode of Mormon Stories of all time. Now, I take umbrage with that. That's very offensive to me. No, it's not. But people are loving this. Yeah, but like, I want to make this a series. Like, first of all, I want to have Relief Society presidents.
Yes.
You know, a panel of Relief
Yes.
Society presidents, stake Relief Society presidents to talk about their experiences in
Yeah.
the church. Wouldn't that be amazing? And then there's so many questions I want to ask, but it would literally triple the time. Like, I want to know if all of you had advice for the church to make, because we all know the Mormon church is hemorrhaging, along with a lot of other world religions, especially in the developed world. It'd be fun to hear each of you give advice to the church for how you would strengthen the church. I think that's a hard question, but it would be fun. There's clearly an epidemic of PMO bishops and stake presidents, of bishops and stake presidents that are losing their faith while they're bishops and stake presidents because they keep reaching out to me, you know, everyone. Like, is this going to become a bigger and a bigger problem? Why is it such a big problem? Is there anything the church could do to either fix it or provide better support for that when it happens? I totally want to hear. I'll just tell a quick story. Once I'm meeting with this early in the Mormon Stories life. Maybe I've told the story before. I'm meeting with this prominent online Mormon, ex-Mormon named Corey Kilpack, who's from the Bay Area, who was known as Mayan Elephant on the boards back in the day. And he told me this. I've never had like a metaphysical experience before, almost like this, where he's telling me about the time he presided over the excommunication of let's just say a single woman for like having sex or whatever. And he's talking to me about how much he regrets presiding over her excommunication. And I kid you not, this was like a special effects moment, but in real time, his hands swelled to like 3 times their normal size as he was telling me the story. And it was like hives. You know how people have hives? Like I remember once Margie had hives so bad her lip started swelling. And I'm like, whoa, your lip is like deformed. And it was hives. He got hives on his hands so bad that they swelled to like 3 times their normal size because he regretted so much what he did as a bishop or as a member of a stake high council or in a stake presidency. I would love to hear y'all talk about biggest regrets as bishops or, you know, in stake presidencies. There's so much more that I would want to hear. And I just don't know how much time we want to take today or if we want to save that for another time. You know.
Well, how much energy do we have, you guys? Is this
I'm here till Monday.
Part 1, part 2, or is this a marathon?
You guys want to do it
I
tomorrow?
think here's what I want to do. If you are a woman, or whatever gender you now identify with, and you have been a stake relief society president or relief society president, I want to do a panel. So reach out to me. Email me at mormonstories@gmail.com. Put former relief society president or former stake relief society president or women's auxiliary leader, whatever it is, and you want to come on a panel, we want to do that. So please reach out. Also, if you live in this area, because Rob goes back to Bremerton and Nick goes back to Mississippi, right? If you are a former bishop, we want to do this panel again. So please reach out to me, especially if you live close to Salt Lake or visit, because I want to have this maybe even be a recurring series. Please reach out to me, put former Mormon Bishop in an email to mormonstories@gmail.com, and we want to hear from you as well.
I know there were other bishops.
Former mission presidents, former general authorities, former area authorities, former stake presidents, like any of that. What were we saying about?
Yeah, I was going to say there's another bishop that I was talking to that I'd put some feelers out who wanted to be on, but just timing didn't work. So I know that there are many people out there who would like to be part of this discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, because I do like the spirit of this. It's like you guys all have a palpable love for the church, but also a frustration that the church could be better. And that's Mormon Stories at its best. When we have love and compassion and best faith assumptions, willing to be critical, but also willing to be generous. So I love the spirit of today. I don't know if y'all want to tackle any of the questions I just threw out there, but you asked, Beau. Those are some of the questions I have.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'll tackle the regret one.
Okay.
I have so many regrets.
Yeah.
I do.
Oh, and I also want to know what caused you all to leave the church, just or transform your faith. But go ahead, Beau.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with regrets, and then also happy to address the second one as well. So I do have regrets. Most of my regrets happened at the beginning of being bishop, before I began to expand my faith. They almost all have to do with either coming down too hard on sexuality, on law of chastity, and or finances, and just being a hard ass. And there were 5 instances in particular in which, after being bishop, after I was released, I have hunted down 3 out of the 5 of those members and contacted them out of the blue and just said, "Hey, this is Beau Euler. I was your bishop. Would you mind if I called you?" Or I just called them. And those have turned into 3 out of the 5 so far. Have been just beautiful conversations where I've called them and I just said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember this conversation. Here's what I said. I see things totally differently now, and I'm really sorry that I bishoped you that way. I just did what I thought I was supposed to do. I was just following the handbook." And all 3 of them just said, "Oh, Beau, dude, you got to let that go. It's okay. You were just doing what you thought you needed to do. I'm okay. Thank you."
Can I ask you, can you live, I'm supposed to look at the camera, can you live without regrets and still make those reconciliations, is my question. I've got a great quote here. I'd love to Sir Anthony Hopkins said, he was asked the question, "Do you have any regrets?" He says, "No, I don't have time to regret. We move on because we are acceptable for what we are, not for what we think we should be. I'm acceptable in myself by what I am, but not as I think I should be, because that's a lie. I'm a sinner. I'm an old sinner. I've done some good things. I've done some bad things. So you just forgive yourself and you move on. So you can not regret things, but yet make reconciliations where they need to be met, and not beat yourself up, because we're trying to figure this thing out as we live it in the present. And I think that's part of the problem, is we're too busy trying to be perfect instead of just recognizing that we can just be good. Good's better than perfect, actually.
Agreed.
Jedd, Rob, any regrets?
I kind of lean towards that quote that Nick was just saying. I've said I don't regret my time as bishop at all. I'm positive I said something cringy and stupid to someone along the way, multiple someones and some things. And as people have found out that I've left the church, there's been a few people in the ward who've reached out who have also left the church and just said, hey, it's nice seeing you here on the Mormon Stories Facebook page or ex-Mormon Reddit or wherever. And I'll always take that opportunity to say, man, I hope I didn't offend you or hurt you in any way. I apologize if I did. But I feel like I tried my best to do as good as I could in that position. And so I don't have any regrets, but I do fully recognize and admit that I know I did stuff I should regret. But I do like to give myself a little grace, and I was doing the best that I had with the circumstances at hand. Maybe, and I feel like I was a pretty liberal bishop, and I was very liberal with fast offering funds. We had a lot of, at one point we had 70 single moms in our ward, and probably 50 of them were pretty active.
Holy cow.
We had multiple just fresh divorces, people coming into the ward at their absolute lowest. And we felt like this responsibility to build them back up and to help them get back on their feet. So I was constantly writing checks. I didn't care about, like, my ward maybe brought in maybe $2,000 a month in fast offering funds, and I was sending 10,000 out. No problem. I didn't have any problems doing that. And I regret not doing more of it now, knowing, the coffer that we had to draw on. I regret cutting people off from help a little too soon, and some things like that where I felt some pressure to do that. So my things that I truly regret are not helping people to the end and maybe caving into the system a little more than I would have liked to. My advice to the church, I've thought about this for a while, is maybe drop the one true church. If you get rid of that, you get rid of a whole bunch of pressure.
You have to get rid of Doctrine and Covenant Section
You
1
do.
if you do that.
There's a lot. There's more to that.
very
You can't just say drop it. But if they could move away from that and respect people's spirituality and their journey for what it is and unique to them, I think it would be a much healthier organization. That's not happening. I don't see that happening ever. But I feel like that doctrine or that belief is harmful. It makes everything else less than and everyone else less than. And if they could soften that, quit talking about it, remove it, do something, I think that would help a lot. So that's probably my regret and recommendation.
I think I did as good as I could, as well as I could at the time. There are things that come to memory that I wish had been different, and I can, in hindsight, again, having experience now, chart a path that would be different. But John said in a TikTok or something I saw recently, and I don't know when you actually said this, but you had said the gift of a deconstruction is the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And so I wish, I look back and I wish I had taken more vacations with my children and my wife instead of being, for 21 years, every weekend with the youth, on Saturday and on Sunday doing church stuff. I wish I'd done a better job of balancing those things. I wish I had subordinated my family to my church duties instead of the other way around.
That's beautiful.
The church does say those things, family first, but in the calling of bishop, it's a difficult balance to strike, and I'll leave it at that. I did not do as well as I would have liked to. I don't particularly, I've said a couple of things I wish the church, wouldn't it be nice? But I would rather say something to people that are maybe in a bishop calling or maybe as a second counselor in the stake Sunday school. A friend of mine always joked about that being the best calling in the church. If you've got things on the shelf, the proverbial shelf, it is harming you to keep them there. You have to resolve those things that provide dissonance. Otherwise, you are making decisions and choices in your life based on bad information and assumptions that may end up being to your detriment. I find that as I've stepped away from some of the narrow path, the narrow gate, that I'm able to make better decisions and be more present today with people that I have relationships with. And even though we just met last night and Jedd just this morning, and John, we've met a few years ago, but it's been periodic, an annual hour here or there. But I find that as I have this open viewpoint now, the friendships are not based on, are you worthy? Are you in the same lane as me? Are you like me? They are more of, what does this relationship provide that is valuable to the both of us? And admittedly, there is times when I obtain more value than I give, and the other way around, but that's the nature of relationships. As soon as you open your aperture and start looking at other characteristics that can enrich your life, it is, I don't know how to overstate how big that change in your life is. When you have the ability to empathize, to value, and not be judgmental, to be more curious about what that person's about. So regrets, I really do wish that I had done more with vacation time. The good news is I got to retire pretty young, and my wife and I are going to take advantage of that money we saved and put away and visit the kids and go do better because I know better.
That's awesome. Thanks. Thank you for being vulnerable, you guys. I really, I appreciate it and I feel it. And I would say on the last, the last question, John, of like, why, if we want to go there, why have some of you left the church and how have you expanded your faith? I love the idea of the aperture expanding and opening up. And that began for me when in my first year of being bishop. And I came home from a long night of meetings. It was late. I crawled into bed and my wife had been crying. And she's not a crier. And she cuddled up next to me. And I said, honey, what's wrong? And she said, I can't tell you. And I said, you can tell me anything. I was just sitting for 6 hours with people telling me their deepest, darkest secrets. And she said, I can't tell you. And so I just held her. And finally she told me. She said, Beau, the church isn't what we think it is.
It's like the most painful thing you can feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That your wife is feeling that, or that you're feeling that?
Just in general, that any
just in
individual's
general.
feeling it in general. It's excruciating.
And so that began a curiosity. That began to shift the way that we thought, to look at things that were that we couldn't look at before. And then during that next 4 years, was CES letters, church essays. It was exclusion policy. It was, a lot of big events in Mormonism. And instead of, I was a great apologist, don't get me wrong. But we began to expand and began to explore and began to be curious. And these fear tactics of where will you go? What will you do? There is nothing but sadness and misery out there. For some people, that is true. That hasn't been my experience. And although I choose to continue to participate in the church, I choose how to participate. And I choose where I find value in my participation of the church. And I choose to spend the vast majority of my time participating in work that I find great value in. And that's outside of the church. And it's a form of spirituality that's far more expansive than what I experienced within the church. And so for me, it's a blend of, it's like the tent, right? The proverbial tent. And I just took the walls off my tent. They just don't exist. In, out, doesn't exist, doesn't matter. And it's brought so much light and so much beauty and so much growth. And for now, it's painful and exciting and all of the above.
It's kind of like what we talked about at lunch yesterday, John. Just similar, having every viable option. When you're a slave to, the machine, you have direction. You know what you're going to do the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. You're going to get baptized at 8. You're going to receive priesthood at 12 or enter into a young women's organization. You're going to go on a mission. You're going to get married in a temple. You're going to have babies.
Don't forget BYU.
You're going to go to BYU unless you're me and you don't go to college at all because you barely graduated high school. That's fine. But then the plan is retire and go serve.
A mission for the church, multiple
for
missions.
The church, and you pay for it while you do it.
Yeah, and neglect your grandkids and kids.
It's like, where did you choose? And yeah, you feel a little angry and robbed because you're like, man, did I choose any of this? And then you step outside and you're a little scared because you're like, well, now I have it's not just milk or orange juice. It's every drink imaginable. And I want to know what they all taste like. Even if I don't like them. That's terrifying. But it's like wading through 3 feet of water and thinking you can't put your feet down. And realize, oh, you're fine. Because a lot of people literally think they have to swim through 3 feet, and that's all they can do, when all they have to do is stand up. And I mentioned this yesterday, but that's my fear right now, being a new person exiting this thing. I was telling Amanda last night after we went to the brewery, I was like, man, are we turning into those people? Because I'm scared to turn into that person. But the reality is no, we didn't get drunk. We didn't drink hard. Someone bought me a drink. I don't even know what it was. It was okay, but I didn't even drink it all. That was the whole night. That's
how it starts. That's how it starts.
Okay, fine. But I want to out that and say, yeah, there are some examples, and those are the ones that people in the church hear about, where they turn to drugs and adulterous things and a life of hedonistic thoughts and actions. But that's not the case for most of the people I've met with.
Yeah.
It's a rare thing.
So for my deconstruction, I had 2 very pivotal experiences as bishop that kind of ruined that, like kind of killed the facade for me. And the first one I already mentioned was talking to the young man who had told me he just was afraid to pray for someone to fall in love with. And I just had this feeling of, man, the church is dead wrong about this. And I don't believe that there is a loving ultimate power out there that would make somebody choose between a church and having a fulfilling, loving relationship with another human being. The second one was through the abuse issue in my ward. I had to really think hard about I put this man in a position through what I thought was discernment, and I put him in a position that put him in front of a child that he abused. And I just, from that point on, when people would come and ask me and say, is this calling really from God? I'd say, I don't know. Might be. We did our best, but I'm not going to claim that anymore, because the last time I claimed it, something really bad happened. Those two things made me just really lose faith in the structure of the church. More so, I lost trust in the God that I was taught to believe in. And in my last couple years of being bishop, I really struggled with believing in any type of deity, and if there's a role for a savior, if we need any of that. And I kind of deconstructed a little backwards, where I kind of lost my faith in the Judeo-Christian God long before I lost my faith in the church. I still wouldn't allow myself to go down and look at the history and read the CES letter and things like that. I just was too terrified of having to stand up in front of a ward and say, I just can't do this anymore, or to sit in front of my friends and my family and say, I can't do this anymore. I was too cowardly to say that. So I get released, and I get put in the nursery, which was great. That was the right place to be. At that point, I can just go chill out with some kids and eat snacks and have fun. And I was in there with my wife, and we enjoyed that. And she wasn't where I was at. And to be fair, I hadn't told her where I was at. I didn't tell anyone. I was too scared. And then one day she came up to me and showed me a video of some missionaries knocking on the door of an African-American family. And that family said, pull up in your Book of Mormon. Let's read this scripture together, and you tell me what you think it means and why I should listen to what you have to say. And my wife was incensed. She was furious. And she's like, I don't know how I missed this, but is this like blatant racism in our scripture? I'm like, yeah, kind of is. And then we started that journey together. Let's see what else is there. And we were curious, like, what else are we missing? And I mean, it feels like a lifetime, but in about 90 days, it was over. We, garments off. We're never stepping foot in the church again, and it was over for us, mostly over emotional, social issues that kind of broke our shelf, and then getting all the details and facts after of why we don't like it, and it's a hell of a journey. It's very hard. It's very up and down. I went through a long period of just sadness and depression of what am I going to do now? And sadness, like absolute sadness that everything that I loved and threw my life into was wrong. And it was it was all just a lie, is the only way I can put it. And I felt very sad about it. I would just sit in bed at night and just cry, and we'd hold each other like, man, what's next? And then you kind of get through that and you see what's next, and it's beautiful. And there's a big world out there, and we still have struggles, and we still have health issues in our family, and we still have arguments and depression and anxiety. None of that goes away. It was there while we were believing, and it's there now. But we do feel happier and healthier out, and we feel more accepting and loving and willing to see people for who they are and where they're at and learn from them. And all of that has just been such a great journey to go on. And I'm very, very happy that I was able to do it together with my spouse. I just can't imagine trying to navigate those waters. And I feel for those who are going through it, and just hope that there's a good path forward for them. But it's kind of my story in a nutshell. I mean, everyone's is somewhat similar, I've found. As you talk to people, there's some emotional, spiritual issue that kind of cracks you, and then you start digging into the facts and the history, and here we are talking to John DeLynn.
He's such an ass.
Right?
I'm offended.
Well, I've got a talk for you, Elder Bednar.
I like the analogy of a shelf. My shelf had two major boxes on it full of stuff. One was the organization, the body of the cult, the church, not the. That wasn't a Freudian slip. Almost was, but not the people, the organization itself, the structure. And the other was the historical truth claims, the theology, if you will. As I mentioned earlier, much of my real struggle, I had been kind of labeled or given the assignment as the guy who did the faith crisis classes when we did stake workshops, and parents whose children were straying would come to these workshops, and I would talk about any number of the hot button issues and try to answer questions, the issues about racism, the issues about polygamy, about the first vision, and we could go on with those things. And I found myself being able to carry out what the church message was very proficiently. But when my children, as I alluded to with Carly, would ask me deeper questions, I couldn't go deeper. So I started to question things then. And as my term in the stake presidency was winding down, because you get called by inspiration, released by calendar, the 9 years was up. We knew that the general authority was coming, and I couldn't hide what I was thinking about from my wife any longer. And I voiced to her that I was concerned that I would be called to stake president, and I didn't think I could do it. And I was worried that I hadn't talked to her about these things before because I didn't want to be the one to pull her away from the church again. I pulled her away when the Salamander letter came out. That's a whole new story of itself. But I didn't want to do it again, and I was afraid to bring up my worries with her, the one person that I should be able to do that with. Any rate, I mentioned this to her, and she goes, I don't remember the exact conversation, but I remember the feeling of relief because she voiced some doubts that were similar to mine. And it was a kind of, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Kind of evolution that happened there. And as soon as we discovered we were both aligned in many things with our questions, and we could go explore together, all kinds of things opened up. And I think it is true with many people who go through a deconstruction. Once one card goes, the whole house falls. And I had to go through a process of, okay, all these things are up on that shelf. I need to go and I'm an engineer. How do I go methodically? And I reached out to those friends who had been on John's Mormon Stories several years ago. And another friend who, Kelly that we mentioned, when he had gone to Annapolis to the Naval Academy for his next assignment, that's where they had their deconstruction. I wrote him and said what caused it. And he sent me the CES letter, and that gave me an outline, a chapter and verse, kind of go through the topics. And it just, many facets started to be difficult for me to remain believing in anymore. I will tell you, though, the initial thing was the behavior of the leadership and how I could not make the connection. As a young officer, I could make the connection between me and the commanding officer, and I knew how he got where he was and what skills he had, and I could trust the orders that he issued. And I lost that confidence, particularly around the November 15th policy, and then in 19 when it was reversed. I could not. In the Navy, when a ship's commanding officer is relieved, you'll read this in the paper often, the reason stated by the admirals that do it is a loss of confidence in their ability to command. That's exactly what happened with me, and me looking not at the people I worked with directly. I knew those people, but I lost confidence in the leadership structure of the church. And then that caused me to question just about everything else.
It's more of a loss of, it's a trust issue more than a faith issue in that way.
Yeah.
I couldn't trust the leaders anymore. I couldn't trust my own feelings and beliefs on what I'd been taught anymore. And the crisis to me was more a crisis of trust. I was just, like you said, just there was nothing there to hold on to. It was all just slippery
Right.
goop that I couldn't make sense of. And I'm a lot like you, where I had to get to the bottom of the barrel. Like, I didn't stop reading and listening, and I mean, 4 years of just every free second I had of deconstructing this thing, because it just you're that far in, you have to get that far out. That's kind of my thought on it.
Well, thank you guys. Really appreciate the honesty and the vulnerability. John, anything else to add? Or?
Yeah, man. I know part of me wants to wrap up. I've got a little bit more. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
All right, so I'm going to do a lightning round. This is going to be legendary Mormon stories moment.
Lightning round.
We're going to do a lightning round.
Okay.
None of you can answer more than a sentence.
Okay.
If you can do a word or a couple words, great. No more than a sentence. Do I have your consent?
Yes.
Raise your left arm to the square. Beau?
Thumb extended or not extended?
Thumb extended. Up to you. Do whatever you want to.
Repeat it how many
thumbs.
times?
All right. I'm going to do a lightning round. And this is hard because you have to think on the spot. But I just want a lightning round. Is that all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's do it.
Okay. So, Julia, this is going to be its own Facebook short. Lightning round with former Mormon bishops and or stake presidency members. All right? Okay. And we'll just go literally Jedd, Rob, Beau, Nick every time. Okay. So first question, does the Mormon Church provide adequate training to its bishops?
Easy, no.
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 Where's the hell no?
Hell no.
Not at all. It's not even No.
Does the Mormon Church provide training on how to deal with sexual abuse victims or survivors?
Not for me, no.
No.
I received no training.
0.
Okay. Do you remember, know, and are you able to share the average dollar amount of monthly tithing receipts or contributions to the ward you were in?
My best memory is around 10 to 12,000 a week in my ward.
So 40 a month?
Yeah.
40 to 50 a month? Mm-hmm. Okay.
That feels right to me. My counselors did tithing. I didn't.
No idea. I delegated it to my counselors.
I see it because you have to check it
Let's
monthly. 18,000 a month
In Mississippi.
in Mississippi. A month.
Okay, good. This is good. You guys do it great. Okay, this is a big one. Is the gift of discernment real? And for those who don't know what I mean by that, do Mormon bishops have special powers to see and know things that normal mortals do not?
Never once did I feel like I had discernment.
I did feel, but I don't believe it was that. I believe it was a human connection.
Same. I think love is the power of discernment.
Love. Love is the power of discernment, not super special priesthood power. Okay.
For me, it was other people's body language that told me that they had a problem.
And that was just called discernment.
Yes.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
Sorry, breaking your rules.
Fetcher.
Discernment often was other members of the ward coming to the bishop and saying, so-and-so's going through this, so-and-so did this.
Yeah.
That was a lot of my discernment.
Yeah.
It's very true.
Very true.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to be tempted to want to pander here, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Would the Mormon Church be significantly better off if women were allowed to be bishops? And like just a sentence on if yes, why?
Yes, because we need their voice. We need a different perspective.
The main job of that bishop is to help people resolve problems and draw closer to Christ, women are much better at that than men. Having them at it would be terrific.
100% yes.
Full stop for Beau.
Full stop. I mean, I think everyone who has a woman in their life knows that we need to have female bishops.
I've got two answers. I agree with everything they said, but my answer would be no, because I don't believe anyone should ever be called to be a bishop.
That's fair.
You wouldn't wish
Very
it
fair.
on
No one.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Is the Mormon Church's approach to LGBTQ members killing the church?
Yes, without doubt.
Yes, but not by itself.
There's other things too.
Yes.
Yeah, it's completely wrong.
But is it hurting the church?
It's hurting the church.
Significantly.
Significantly.
Okay.
I say yes, but I don't believe it's hurting the church. I believe it's hurting the people.
And the church?
I just believe it hurts the people. The church, to me, is irrelevant.
You don't even want to answer that question.
Yeah, the people matter to me.
Yeah. Okay.
Very fair.
Okay, this is a hard question because I'm not asking you what's morally right. I'm going to ask you what would help the church, and I'm going to define help the church by butts in seats, willingness to serve in callings, and willingness to pay tithing. So put your brain on. You're a general authority at the church headquarters, and your goal is maximizing tithe payers, butts in seats, and people willing to serve in their callings. Would removing worthiness interviews harm the church from that perspective?
I think that is a positive step the church needs to take, is getting rid of member worthiness interviews.
Wait, do you remember what I said?
And I do think it would probably help with attendance.
So you're saying tithing,
Tithing,
attendance? Okay, let me just say it again.
Yeah.
Would tithing go up, faithfulness go up, activity rates go up
No.
if the church eliminated worthiness interviews?
Tithing, I believe, would not go up. But the rest, I think, would.
Okay, Rob?
I'm going to be a hard case for you. The goal of those things that you stated has nothing to do with people's lives and quality. And trying to relate them is only a control mechanism. So if I'm sitting there thinking of those three things and those are my goals, well, it wouldn't hurt. It's not helping. So from a business perspective, why not change that? This is how people become better people, they're not related goals. People's behavior and those goals are not related towards exalting people and making them better people.
Short term, it'll hurt the church. Long term, it'll help the church. With the requirement of butts in the seats, callings, and tithing, because I think that there will be a cycle and a younger generation that if those changes are made, that they may see a resurgence, but they won't come back if these old ways are still in place.
I agree. I would agree with Beau 100%. Yeah.
All right, y'all are doing good. Okay, a couple more. Does the Mormon Church, in your experience, discourage the reporting of sexual abuse and sexual abusers to law enforcement or police?
Yes, experienced it firsthand. Even after we called the police, I was chastised for not calling Curtin and McConkie first and letting them deal with it.
I think they base their advice to bishops on the liability position of the church. I think that is easily seen as discouraging people from reporting.
Yeah. I was taught to protect the good name of the church, and it was out of my personal experience of having been molested as a kid when I was 7 that prompted my first response as a bishop to call CPS rather than the hotline. Otherwise, I would have probably gone through whatever, the normal chain of command is through the hotline and the stake presidency and so on.
Those who saw the podcast yesterday knows my answer is yes.
Yes, what?
Yes, they hide it. They discourage us from doing it.
Think of the Mormon church experience like a product, like McDonald's or Coca-Cola. What's the one thing you would recommend to the church to improve their product, the church experience to the membership?
Good question. To improve the experience, take away the fear and the guilt and the shame.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
My brain with the product question went to business questions, and I would say invest in infrastructure.
Meaning?
Buildings, cleaning staff, counselors, professional aides for people and ecclesiastic. Go and spend the money on those things.
I think as an experience, just turning the focus from the institution to the individuals. Right now, it really is about the institution.
It's hard to be last in these things and be original. Honestly, because everything they've said, from building cleaning to, look, in the South, you're competing with the big, huge new Baptist church that has an immaculate font. Our font, you have to literally walk through the toilet to get to. It's gross. It's filthy. Members clean it, and they don't do it weekly. They could easily hire staff, and they could spruce it up and make this place a lot more appealing to outsiders coming in. If you compare our church building to others, at least in the South, we're getting beat hands down.
This is all great. I'm surprised none of you talked about like making the sacrament meeting experience more entertaining, more fun, more charismatic, more compelling.
Yeah.
But, all the answers are good. All right, next question. This is slightly different. What's one thing the Mormon church could do to stop the hemorrhaging, which is slightly different than improve the product? I'll start with Nick first.
Thank you.
Yeah, reverse that one.
Okay. I shared this in a TikTok I posted the other day, and it's just so profound. Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago said, all the problems in the world would completely disappear if we would just simply tell the truth. I would tell the brethren to stop lying. Tell the truth. If you want to end the hemorrhaging, allow yourself to be found vulnerable in the eyes of the people that you supposedly serve. And watch them follow you, because there's power in vulnerability.
And then to say 3 simple words. We are sorry.
Apologize. Good.
Apologize. Repent. Do what they taught us to do.
Yeah.
Amen.
All right, Rob.
I don't think they can.
Yeah.
I agree with what they have said. Those would be good overtures, but I think that people are discovering a number of things that are flaws, and I think the hemorrhaging will continue.
But that's not your job. What's one thing you do to stop the hemorrhaging? And I love that answer. I'm glad you said it. Stop the hemorrhaging, one recommendation.
I think they need to recognize and acknowledge they don't have all the answers.
All right, Jedd, you get last this time.
Give some of it back. Build hospitals, women's shelters, LGBT safe homes. Give it back, and actually do what you say Jesus would want you to do, and go do it.
Okay, 2 more. This problem of PMO bishops wanting to die by suicide, you know what I'm saying? Just stuck as a bishop or stake president, no longer believing, but feeling like they can't resign or step away without it being viewed as adulterers or porn lickers or worse, or just failing everyone, their community, their spouse, their family. Would the answer to that be eliminating expected terms, bishop 5 years, stake president 10 years? Would that would that help solve the problem? I'm going to go with Beau first.
I don't think that would solve the problem.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Do you have a solution for that?
I don't have a solution, because the challenge is that the bishops who are PMO, physically and mentally out, are the bishops who have looked behind the veil. Right? And they have seen
the sausage is made.
They saw how the sausage is made. They've seen the Wizard of Oz, and they see that it isn't what they thought it was. And then they have to look at themselves in the mirror and say, what good am I doing? And then that's just a personal choice of where they want to spend their energy and do good. And so whether it's a 3-year term or a 5-year term or whatever, you're just called to it, I don't know that that's going to matter.
My opinion, do yourself a favor. More importantly, do your family a favor and do the right thing. You want to be a savior on Mount Zion because we've been programmed to do that and to be that. But if you're not healthy in the position you're in, you're not going to do near the good that you think that you can.
Or if you're not alive.
Or that.
Yeah.
I'm very thankful for the example of all these men and everyone else before me who stood up and left. And maybe that softens some of the stigma around quitting a calling, to see that it's, we need to take care of ourselves first. And the upper leadership needs to make that more acceptable and not as shameful.
I don't think shifting the terms, the term of service is the key issue. Shifting the expectations of what they are to do while they're in those callings and the support they are provided will make a difference. Term is just less suck or more suck. You got to change how hard it is to do what is being asked. Change what is being asked.
Okay, last question. I don't mean this to be too glib or like a sucker punch. As far as what you've seen in terms of the priority of area authorities and general authorities, I'm going to give you just a binary choice. It's a false binary, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. Health and well-being of the members, tithing, commitment, and good name of the church on the other. So these are two choices as to what they care about most. Health and well-being of the members, tithing, commitment of members, good name of the church. Where do you see the brethren coming down in terms of their priority?
I'm happy to go first. Institution over the individual every time. The practice over the person every time.
I agree. I will say they want both and don't recognize in the current construct they cannot have both. So they defer to the institution. And that trumps, that has priority.
To me, I think they've proven where their intent is. They will trick and lie and hide things from the members to keep the money flowing. And that's just, in my view, that's just what has happened for the history of the church.
This may not be a lightning answer, John, but we live in a place where we have hurricanes and tornadoes every year. I have at least a dozen helping hand shirts that are faded yellow from how many weekends. It's nearly 100 weekends in my life of going after working Monday through Friday and then spending our money on buying chainsaws, equipment. People have skid steers that they offer. And while we're out here doing this service, the church is making sure that we are accounting for every single man hour because they're being credited money and funds while we're coming out of pocket and giving not only our time and our talents and everything in between to them, but people get injured on these things. And it's their insurance that covers them or out of their pocket that covers them. They 100% care about the institution, and they do not care about the people.
And I would challenge that, because I think that they do care about the people. I think that so there was a talk that President Nelson gave a number of years ago, and I think that the term that he used is called divine love. And there's a sharp contrast between unconditional love and divine love. And the contrast is that divine love is a love that requires. And when you look at it clearly, it's the opposite of unconditional love. And so the work that the brethren do, I believe that they're doing it truly out of love. And that's why they're building temples. Because the greatest thing that they could do is to manifest Christ's love by bringing these covenants to as many people as possible. That the greatest thing that they could do is to love God's children by spreading his word and his church to as many people as possible. And it is a conditional love that he coined divine love. And so in their hearts, they feel that they're doing it out of love.
Their behavior, though, I'm going to push back on the pushback.
I have
Their behavior, when it comes to a line of better for the church or better for the people, they choose the institution over and over again.
Yep.
So I can't dispute what you have, Beau, have portrayed as their motivation for doing those things, but there is easily found counter arguments to why they're building temples.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think when you look at the individual, and when you have a choice between buying a chainsaw or getting a church to buy it, even though you're wearing the yellow shirt, the money question comes up over and over again, and the deference goes to keeping the church solid financially.
Agreed.
If God created this earth, and going outside in Utah, you see the majesty of it when you see these mountains, because where we're from, it's trees. You don't get to see that. This is the first time I've been to Utah where I didn't just marvel at the temples. I actually looked at the mountains, and I marveled at what God gave us, not what man built. And when I look at a building that cost tens of millions of dollars to build, while children in this country, in this state, are starving to death, I cannot look at temples and think that they are good places any longer.
Agree. Yeah. I feel very much the same way. I feel very much the same way. I cannot resolve that contrast of greatest blessing on earth. You'll be hungry, but it'll be better later. I cannot resolve that.
Wow, what a mic drop. What a great 3 hours, 3 hours and 15 minutes. It's been amazing. So many people have said this is one of their favorite episodes of the year or of all time. We've received so many super chats that I'm just super grateful for. Carol Barnard. I'm just going to read a couple comments really quick, or questions. Tommy Cochran writes, I served in a branch presidency on my mission, and so many things happened that no 19-year-old boy could have been prepared for. Look up to you, gents. I should have mentioned I served twice as a branch president on my mission. So, I mean, I haven't been a bishop, but I've been a branch president.
You're even less prepared.
Right. Yeah,
Why
for
would they
sure.
do that to people?
In Guatemala, are you kidding me? Yeah.
19.
Yeah. Rio for Life Kim D writes, thanks for sharing your bishop experiences. My wish for you is to continue experiencing and showing these difficult emotions. Love from Hibbing, Minnesota. Suzanne Enright writes, my personal experience in the church was that Mormonism oversimplified the very complex reality of being a human. Thank you for shining a light on this and what is possible from being vulnerable and connecting as humans, trying our very best. Thank you, Suzanne, so much for the super chat. Jonalyn Elzinga writes, been a difficult mental health week for me. Listening to these beautiful men has been an amazing balm. So glad it meant a lot to you, Jonalyn. Thanks for sharing. Nana Rose writes, my son, who is 48 years old, was on a group chat with myself and his two sisters, and he said, quote, the thing I feel so angry about with the church is how self-abusive it made me, and I think all of us. Wow, that's a really good comment. Thank you, Nana Rose. Julie Meekum writes, thank you for bringing this to us, John. Thanks, JD France. A couple more. Profin or not says, these guys are gold. Next time, invite Release Society presidents or any women's leadership position. Would love to watch. I do commit that we will be having at least one of those series, if not an ongoing series. So that's going to happen. Thanks for the suggestion. Email me at mormonstories@gmail.com if you live in the area and think you would have something to contribute. Nana Rose writes, I remain on the church records only because my ex-husband fears losing being sealed to our children. I know it's not true and feel it gives him some peace, but I'm questioning remaining on the records now after hearing you guys, I guess, she's saying. Anyway, she's saying keep it up. Shannon M. writes, keep up the amazing work, Mormon Stories. Thank you, Shannon. The Barb Knows Best writes, the rich LDS Church should have written guidelines for each state to handle child abuse and protect children. State laws vary. Violating clergy penitent privilege can incur serious liability. Okay. Thanks for that perspective. Darren Lee writes, have any of you experienced, observed a sense of superiority that appears or develops as bishops counsel and fix serious issues with members, quote, helping them come back to God or be worthy again? It's very slippery. Yeah. You're nodding. Rob, what do you have to say about that?
It's a very, as you said, a very slippery slope. You can feel good about helping people, and then you can develop this puffed ego. Definitely a problem, a trap.
It's almost impossible not to when every prayer said that you're around is please bless our good bishop to have the, it's hard not to feel that little ego boost and that superiority when it's just heaped on you over and over and over again for nothing that you did personally.
You know where that stems from. General conferences where they say, we testify that the prophet is this thing. It happened in like the early 2000s. It's just become this pandemic of let's worship our leaders.
Yeah, standing when they come into a room.
Yes.
Standing till they leave. Like this, this hero worship, it's real. It's there.
Well, the Doctrine and Covenants says, whether by my voice or the voice of my servants, it is the same. And bishops are the prophet for the ward, right?
Yeah.
I think where you see the damage is when the person doesn't follow the bishop's advice and it goes further south for them. The person is to blame. Not the bishop who gave them correct or incorrect. And you see that institutionally. It's the fundamental attribution error. You know that. When I look at a person and see their success, I give it to their luck. When I see them do something that hurts them, I blame it on their character. When I look at myself, my success is my character, and my failure is my bad luck or the environment around me. The institution does the same thing.
Beautiful. Okay, a couple more. So this is interesting. B. Gediat in Kamarath says, these men are why I don't remove my membership. Sustain local leaders, oppose general leaders, don't believe religious truth claims. The evolving apologetics are the wet sand in a faith foundation, not Mormon Stories podcast or others outside. Anyone understand what that person just said?
I don't think they understand what they asked.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing the same. Soap and Clay writes, this is the meaning of once a bishop, always a bishop, because the things they carried, they'll carry for life. Thank you for this discussion. Yeah, I'm reminded of like the Lord of the Rings and the ring bearers were never the same.
Yeah.
After they bore the ring. Do you guys resonate with that?
Yeah, there's an interesting, I don't know how widespread it is, but most bishops, when they get released, quit, or otherwise move out of their ward pretty quick. We didn't have that opportunity because we wanted to keep our kids secure and stable in school and everything until they grew up. But it's a burden because people know what they told you. They remember. And you know some of their deep, dark secrets they don't want out. And now you're kind of this potential boogeyman that can come back and get them. That's the impression I felt from people in my ward, and kind of the cold shoulder that I get from them. That's part of it, I think.
Beautiful. All right, really quickly, there's still 2,600 people on this live stream and chat. If everybody likes this episode right now, YouTube's going to blast it out in the algorithms more than it would have. So please, everyone, take a minute to like this episode. Please subscribe to this channel either on Facebook or YouTube if you haven't already. The more subscribers we have, the better we do in the algorithm. Thank you for the super chats. Mostly thank you for the monthly donors. Your monthly donations are what keeps this episode alive. If you want to become a monthly donor, go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button, become a monthly donor. That's what makes all this possible. Always a super thanks to Julia, Maven, Gerardo, and Brooklyn, because they're my production staff that does all the work behind the scenes, and to my board of directors that keeps us on the straight and narrow. Thanks to all of them. And Jedd, Rob, Beau, and Nick, you're all amazing panelists. This has been a legendary Mormon Stories episode. It's a historic Mormon Stories episode. So thanks to you all for being willing to come on and do this. And a special thanks to Beau, because this was your freaking idea.
Glad that we
Great
did
idea,
it.
Beau.
Thanks,
Thank you, Beau.
everybody, for joining me. Really appreciate it. And John, thanks for the trust and facilitating this.
Yeah.
I'd love to do it again.
Okay. All right. So we're going to do it again. Beau, you won't be presiding over the women's discussion. Is that
Thank
okay?
you.
So we're going to have a women's panel. We're going to maybe do some more bishops panels and other panels, but this is fun. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Amazing comments in the chat. Love my job most of the time. And yeah, thanks to everyone. We've got another this afternoon. We're going to be doing Michael Quinn's autobiography with Barbara Jones Brown and Michael Quinn's son, Moshe. That's going to be amazing. And we've got really great stuff coming up in the weeks and months ahead. So thanks for joining us. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. We'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody.